I've always been fascinated by hiking. The silence of nature, the feeling of isolation, the adrenaline rush of being in a remote place. That's why I didn't hesitate when Michael suggested we do a trail in the Appalachian Mountains. It was him, me, David, and Richard. The initial plan was just a day hike, and if it went well, we'd come back later for a full weekend. This all happened over 20 years ago when I was in my early 20s, and everything felt like an adventure. Even when the trail in question was known as one of the most dangerous in the United States, with countless disappearances. When you're young, you feel invincible, like nothing can hurt you. We were from the area, so we had heard all the stories, passed down through generations almost as a form of warning. We ignored them, deciding to see for ourselves. We left home before dawn, and arrived at the starting point at sunrise. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, creating a thick, oppressive atmosphere. The air was damp, so we adjusted our backpacks, checked the map, and started the hike. The first part of the trail was relatively easy, mostly flat with no major inclines. But soon, it began to change. The vegetation became denser, darker, blocking more sunlight. We were excited. It felt like the real challenge was about to begin. But as we walked, we noticed something unsettling. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. Birds were rare. I can't quite explain the feeling we had, but it was as if the forest was empty. We were commenting on the strange silence when David suddenly tripped over a rope. We were all stunned. It was some kind of trap, though it didn't seem functional, like it had been there for a long time. Hunting was already banned in that area, but back then, many hunters still roamed those woods. We assumed it was an old, abandoned trap and dismissed it. Still, David had twisted his ankle. It didn't seem broken, but it was slightly swollen. Our hike had been planned on a tight schedule. We were supposed to reach the car by nightfall, assuming we kept our normal pace. But with David's injury, that was impossible. As we debated our options and looked for nearby shelters, we started to get the unsettling feeling that we were being watched. I stood up, trying to get a better look through the trees. And that's when I saw him. A head, barely visible in the distance. I took a few steps forward to confirm what I was seeing. And yes, there was a man staring at us. It was deeply unnerving. His face was painted with something dark. His hair was long, tied back with a cloth. But the most terrifying thing was that he didn't look away, didn't move. He wasn't even trying to hide. When I turned back to my friends, they already knew. Michael had spotted another man on the opposite side, watching us just as intently. There were local rumors about people living deep in those woods, but nothing suggesting they were dangerous. It was an unspoken agreement. We left them alone, and they left us alone. But, standing there, being watched like that, was disturbing, so we decided it was best to turn back. At this point, David was struggling to walk, so we had to take it slow. There was a shelter marked on the map not too far away. With some rest, his ankle might improve by morning, or at least we'd have the whole day to descend safely in daylight. When we finally reached the shelter, that's when things really went wrong. There was already a man there, sitting by a small fire, sharpening knives. The scene was unsettling, but as I said, this was a common hunting area, and we had no choice. We approached him, asking if he would mind sharing the shelter for the night. That first interaction was one of the most uncomfortable moments of my life. He looked completely unhinged. If someone had told me he was a serial killer, I wouldn't have been surprised. He stared us up and down before finally agreeing. We sat by the fire, and that's when he started talking. His words genuinely terrified us. It was pure hatred and rage. He spoke about the scum living in those woods, saying they all deserved to die in the most brutal ways. His words made us incredibly uneasy, and when he noticed, he changed the subject. He talked about how his father used to take him hunting in those woods when he was a child, how much he loved it, how he spent long periods there. The more he spoke, the more it felt like he wasn't just talking about hunting animals. I eventually said I was tired and needed to sleep, and the others followed. We considered leaving right then and there, hiking back in the dark, but we also didn't know what those other men wanted. Even by the fire, we had the distinct feeling we were still being watched. We decided to stay but take turns keeping watch over the man. Around 3 a.m., we were jolted awake by a distant explosion. The man immediately stood up, and with the most sinister smile I've ever seen, he told us not to worry. He was finally going to take care of those mongrels. In that moment, I knew for sure. He wasn't hunting animals. He was hunting those people. The realization made me sick. I told my friends we needed to get as far away from him as possible. Everyone agreed, so we grabbed our gear and started making our way back down the trail as fast as David's ankle would allow. Then, in the distance, we heard a woman scream. A blood-curdling, desperate sound. It sent a chill through us, and even now, I can still hear it echoing in my mind. Not even 5 minutes later, we were completely surrounded. A group of people emerged from the trees. They wore little clothing for the cold night. They looked scared, but ready to fight. Michael quickly spoke up, telling them we meant no harm. One man stepped forward, his accent rough, and asked what we had done to their families. One by one, their people had been disappearing into the night, never returning. They knew they were being hunted, but they didn't know why or by whom. I quickly explained everything. The man at the shelter, how we had nothing to do with him, how we respected their way of life as long as no one got hurt. Without another word, they opened their circle and let us go. We ran as fast as we could. Even with his injury, David was running on pure adrenaline, and in less than 4 hours, we reached the car. We reported everything to the police, told them there was a serial killer in the woods hunting people. The worst part? When we described him, I got the distinct feeling they already knew exactly who he was. Over the years, I kept trying to find out if anything had ever been done, if he had been caught. But I never heard another word about it. I don't know if the police ever did anything at all. Hey, Horror Spectator here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you're always in the loop when new videos drop. We post 2 videos every week. If you're really into this content, consider sharing it with your friends. It really helps us grow this community. Now, let's move on to the second story. We hit the Pacific Crest Trail every year, just the 2 of us. Hiking has always been our thing, something we could rely on, year after year. The miles, the silence, the rhythm of our boots on the dirt, it felt like home. After so many trips, we knew every part of it like the back of our hands. But this year was different. We were celebrating 15 years of marriage, and we wanted to do something special. Not a fancy dinner, not a big trip overseas, just us, in the wilderness, like always. But instead of the familiar trails of the Pacific Crest Trail, we decided to challenge ourselves with something new. The Appalachian Trail. Different terrain, different climate, different kind of wild. We were experienced, careful, prepared, or at least, we thought we were. This time, we picked a remote section, far from touristy spots. Just pure, untouched forest. The first few days were perfect. Cool air, golden leaves crunching under our boots. The trail twisted through thick woods, breaking occasionally into breathtaking overlooks. We felt at home. Then, we saw them. It was midday when we rounded a bend and spotted 2 people sitting on a fallen log just off the path. A man and a woman, motionless. Something about them was off immediately. They weren't other hikers, not like us. Their clothes were all wrong, dirty, tattered, but deliberate. The woman wore all black, the man all white. Their hair was unkempt, their faces smeared with dirt. And they just watched us. We almost walked past without stopping, pretending not to notice. No nods, no greetings, just silence. I seriously considered acting like they weren't even there. Something about that pair felt off. But my wife, she was alarmed. Her mind went somewhere else entirely. She thought they might be long-lost hikers, people who had been missing for years, and could need help. I made the first move. A simple wave. Nothing. No reaction. Then Anna, always the compassionate one, stepped closer, introduced herself, and asked if they needed anything. Still, nothing. Not a blink, not a twitch. Just vacant, lifeless stares. She tried again, her voice softer this time. But when they didn't respond, I grabbed her arm. "We need to go," I whispered, keeping my eyes on them. We could always tell the police later. Two middle-aged people, motionless, unresponsive, like they weren't even there. But as we moved on, that crawling sensation of being watched stayed with us. Even after they disappeared from sight, something told me they weren't gone. That night, we set up camp deep in the woods, well off the trail. Standard practice for us, less chance of running into anyone. We ate, packed away our food properly, and settled in. The forest was calm, quiet, nothing unusual. Until the morning. I woke up with a strange feeling, but nothing major. I had actually slept well, for once, which is rare for me. I have a hard time falling asleep, and even the tiniest noise usually wakes me up. I stretched, unzipped the tent, and that's when I saw it. Our food bag was gone. At first, we thought a bear had gotten to it. But then we saw the footprints. Human prints, circling our tent. Not one set, but more. Carefully placed, deliberate. They'd been here, watching us sleep. It genuinely scared me that someone had been so close to us, and I hadn't even woken up. Was it just exhaustion from the day? We didn't talk much as we packed up, just quick glances, silent understanding. We needed to move. Fast. We hit the trail at a brutal pace, pushing ourselves harder than usual. But no matter how far we went, the feeling never left. That itch between the shoulder blades, the certainty that we weren't alone. For days we hiked, always pushing forward, always alert. We never saw them again. But every morning, new footprints appeared. Some nights, we'd wake to the sound of twigs snapping just outside the tent. We started sleeping in shifts, knives in hand. But no matter how much we watched, we never caught them in the act. By the fourth night, exhaustion had set in. We found a spot near a rocky outcrop and set up camp. I laid out a perimeter of dry branches, an old trick to hear intruders coming. Maybe it would give us a few seconds warning. I woke up to the sound of one breaking. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding. The fire had burned down to embers, the world around us pitch black. And then, just beyond the soft glow, movement. The woman stood there, dressed in black, blending into the darkness. Her face pale, eyes locked on the tent. Then, she stepped forward. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Behind her, just out of reach of the dying firelight, I saw the man. He was further back, half hidden by the trees, waiting. That's when the whispering started. It was low, urgent, like voices carried on the wind. But there was no wind, and it wasn't words, not really. Just sounds, murmurs. From them, from the trees, from everywhere. I reached for my knife, my hand shaking. Anna was already awake, sitting up slowly. We didn't speak. We just waited. Then, the whispers stopped. Just like that. No retreating footsteps, no rustling leaves, just gone. We didn't wait for sunrise. We tore down camp in record time and started hiking before the first light touched the trees. We didn't stop, not for water, not for food, just moving, pushing forward. Then, as the sun climbed higher, we saw them again, far down the trail, barely visible through the shifting light, walking, not rushing, not hiding, just walking, following. I already knew something was seriously wrong. How were they keeping up with us? During the day, they followed behind. At night, they crept into our camp, went through our stuff. When did they even sleep? That's when we saw a third man in the distance, bigger, younger, stronger. I looked at Anna and said, "We need to run." She didn't even hesitate. Hours passed in a blur of aching legs and burning lungs. We didn't stop, didn't look back. But even as exhaustion crept in, the feeling never left. Even though I couldn't see them, I knew they were there. But how? By the time night fell, we were wrecked. No choice but to stop. We went deep into the woods, far from the trail. No fire, no food. Just darkness and the crushing weight of silence. I didn't sleep, neither did Anna. We sat there, knives in hand, waiting, listening. Then, a light. A single flashlight beam cut through the trees, sweeping slowly across the forest. Searching. I held my breath. The beam moved closer. Closer. I was about to jump up and start screaming. Maybe that would scare them off. Sometimes, the secret to survival is being even crazier than the other person, really making them afraid. But then, it shut off. Silence. A twig snapped, barely a few feet away. We didn't hear anything else the entire night. It was like they had vanished. In the morning, we set out again. Not running. None of us could manage that, especially after a sleepless night. But we knew we were close. Close to a small town where we could ask for help and, hopefully, get an Uber to take us home. The relief we felt when we finally reached the town was indescribable. We reported everything to the police, but so far, there hasn't been a single development. What scares me the most is how silently they moved through the forest, almost like ghosts. It intrigues me that they never did anything, even when they were so close and we were completely defenseless. I don't have the answers, but I'm just glad we managed to get out of that situation alive. Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're once again exploring 3 chilling stories of people who ventured into the Appalachian Mountains during the month of October and experienced truly terrifying moments. The first story left me genuinely unsure of what to think. If you have any idea of what might have happened, let me know in the comments. And the last one really made me reflect on how differently we all react when faced with danger. Thank you so much for being here and for choosing to support this channel. I truly hope you enjoy this video as much as I enjoyed reading and putting these stories together. If you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. Alright, so what I'm about to tell you went down at the start of this October. And yeah, it's still technically under investigation. But I need to get it off my chest. And maybe warn people too. Because honestly, what happened to me and my friends was so damn bizarre that I keep thinking someone out there must have heard about something like this before. Maybe they can help make sense of it. 'Cause we sure can't. So, between the end of September and the first week of October, like September 28th to October 5th. My friends and I had this whole plan: a few hikes and a camping trip near Fontana Lake in North Carolina. It's that big, quiet lake surrounded by the Smokies, and the Appalachian Trail actually crosses the dam. We'd done a bunch of hikes together before, but always around West Virginia, where we're all from. This time, we wanted something new. Carla, one of the girls in our group, her birthday's October 3rd, and somehow all 7 of us managed to get that week off work. Which, if you're near 30, you know is basically a miracle. So, it felt like the stars were kinda aligning, you know? We were all hyped, talking about how we'd finally unplug for a few days. No phones, no emails, just nature, quiet, and catching up like old times. We met up at Liam's place on the 27th, loaded 2 cars with all our gear, snacks, way too many flashlights, and hit the road. The whole first day was just about getting to the lake before dark. I remember thinking, there's no way we'll make it before sunset. Everyone hikes at different speeds, and we hadn't all been together in almost a year. So, of course, there were breaks every 10 minutes just to talk or laugh or mess around. But somehow, we did make it before dark. Funny thing is, we'd read online, some Facebook group or maybe Reddit, I don't even remember, that the trail to the lake was tough. Steep climbs, rough descents, all that. But it wasn't. It was actually kinda easy. Mostly flat and crazy beautiful. Like the trees were turning gold and orange. That crisp autumn air that just makes you feel alive. When we finally got to the lake, we set up our tents and just stood there for a while. Not even talking. Just soaking it all in. That night, we made dinner together. Went for a little walk to check out the area, trying to see if there were other campers around. We figured we'd at least run into someone, but nope. Not a soul. We went back to camp, hung out by the fire for a bit. Some of the group stayed up talking and drinking, but I was exhausted. I'd barely slept the night before, so I crashed early. Slept like a rock, actually. Woke up to the sunlight hitting the tent and felt amazing. Like, yeah, this is exactly what I needed. The plan for that day was simple. Hike a bit more. Find that spot by the lake everyone said was perfect for swimming. It was starting to get cooler, especially at night, with that thick fog rolling over the water. But during the day, it was still warm enough for a dip. That's when things got weird. Mia, she's one of my closest friends, pulled me aside and said she thought she saw someone standing between the trees, watching us. I looked over where she pointed, but there was nothing there. Still, she looked genuinely scared, like pale and shaky, not just joking around. So I told her I'd go check. I walked toward the trees, and at first, I didn't see anything either. But then I noticed a cigarette butt on the ground, still warm, and I could smell the smoke. Someone had been standing there, like just moments before. I went back and told everyone what Mia had seen, and what I found. The reactions were all over the place. A couple of them got freaked out right away. Liam started talking about setting up stick traps around the tents, which, honestly, was a little much. Carla, though, she just laughed it off. Said it was probably some random person passing through, maybe curious. Come on, there's 7 of us, she said. Nobody's gonna mess with a group this big. And she wasn't wrong. so I tried to shake it off too. But Mia couldn't. Liam either. She kept saying she didn't feel safe. And man, looking back now, I can't blame her. That night, we were all sitting around the fire again. And then we heard it. Movement coming from the same direction as before. Mia heard it too. It wasn't my imagination. I grabbed my flashlight, walked up to the tree line and called out, "Hey, is someone there?" Nothing. Just silence. So I figured, okay, must have been an animal or something, and went back to sit by the fire. One by one, everyone drifted off to their tents. I stayed up a bit longer though. Couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that cigarette. About the fact that we weren't as alone as we thought. Around 3 a.m., I heard more noises out there. Different directions this time. But I forced myself to ignore it. Told myself it was just the forest doing its thing. Then, around 4:30, I woke up to a scream. Carla's scream. I checked my watch, grabbed the knife I keep next to me, but as soon as I touched the zipper to get out of the tent, my hand just stopped working. My strength vanished. My fingers went numb. The knife slipped from my hand. My vision went blurry and then nothing. Black. Next thing I know, the sun's up. Liam's sitting nearby, looking dazed, like he's been hit by a truck. That's when I realized I wasn't in my tent anymore. I was lying outside, on the ground. Tried to get up, but the world was spinning, my head pounding like someone had smashed it with a bat. And then I saw it. We weren't at our campsite anymore. All our stuff was gone. We were all lying in this open space, completely naked, covered only by these red sheets, arranged in a circle. In the middle, another sheet, darker, soaked in what looked like blood. We started shaking each other awake, panicking, crying, trying to figure out what the hell had happened. Nobody remembered anything. Nothing. It took us hours to find our campsite again. And when we finally did, everything was there. Untouched. Like nothing had happened. Liam had brought this satellite phone, so we called the police. They came. Took us to a hospital. We were tested, checked over. They said we'd all inhaled some kind of gas. But nothing else had been done to us. Physically, anyway. The cops think it might have been some kind of cult. They're still investigating, but we still don't know what happened that night. And honestly, that's the worst part. So this happened back in October 2012, up in the Appalachian Mountains, somewhere along the North Carolina side near Hot Springs. I don't want to be too specific because I still hike there sometimes, but I'll never camp in that area again. It was supposed to be a chill weekend. Just me, my cousin Jake, and our friend Tanner. We'd all grown up hiking together, and every fall we'd pick a new trail to camp out for a night or two. That year, the air was perfect. Cold enough for a hoodie, warm enough that you could sit around the fire without freezing. The leaves were that deep red-gold color that makes the whole world look like it's on fire when the sun hits it. It's such a perfect time of year to go camping. We started late Friday and didn't make camp until near dusk. There was an old fire road we followed up the ridge and found this flat spot overlooking the valley. No cell service, no people, nothing. Just that quiet you only get deep in the woods, when even the wind sounds far away. Back then, satellite phones weren't really something you heard about, or at least we hadn't. So we didn't have one. We set up camp, got a fire going, made chili in one of those aluminum pots, cracked a few beers, all that. Jake pulled out a Bluetooth speaker, but after 10 minutes, he shut it off. Said it didn't sound right out there. I kinda got what he meant. You play music in a place like that, and it feels like you're breaking some rule. It's like the sounds of the forest are sacred, and you're just messing it up. We all agreed to turn off the music, and just enjoy what the forest and the trees were giving us. Around 11 p.m., Tanner said he saw a light moving across the ridge opposite us. It was small at first, like a flashlight bobbing through the trees. We all saw it. My first thought was hunters, or another group camping. But the light didn't move like a flashlight should. It wasn't swinging side to side. It just floated. Slow. Steady. Same height the whole time. That's probably not the best way to describe it, but I really don't know how else to say it. It moved in this totally steady, unnatural way. We joked about it being a ranger, or some dude walking alone. But after a few minutes, it stopped moving. Just sat there across the ridge, flickering a bit. At this point, it really looked like someone holding a light, and just staring right back at us. Jake yelled out, "Hey, you good over there?" But there was no response. Maybe we were too far for them to hear us from where the light was. Sometimes the wind changes how sound travels in the woods. Maybe that was it. We waited a minute, then two. The light didn't move. It didn't blink like a headlamp or flashlight should. I think Tanner got spooked first. He said it looked closer than before. I laughed, but when I looked again, I swear to God, it was closer. Not a lot, just a little lower on the ridge. But I'd been staring at it the whole time, and I could swear it hadn't moved. Once again, it didn't look like a movement a person would make. We all kind of went quiet after that. Nobody said we were scared, but I could feel it. That heaviness when your brain starts asking questions it doesn't want the answers to. Something that might be good to say is that we come from a part of West Virginia where there are a lot of superstitions, a lot of legends and stories about the Appalachians. When you grow up in that kind of environment, it's kind of impossible to believe everything's made up with no truth behind it. So, yeah. At this point, I gotta admit, we were all pretty scared. It's ridiculous to think about three dudes out in the woods getting freaked out over a light. But the setting was perfect for fear. And the light was weird. Unnatural. I swear if you'd been there, you'd understand what I mean. The light looked even closer than before. But then, out of nowhere, it just disappeared. Not seeing it was almost creepier than seeing it. But after a few good hours of not seeing or hearing anything weird, we admitted we'd been a bunch of wimps, cracked some jokes, and went to bed in our tents. Jake and I shared one. Tanner had his own about 10 feet away. The forest had its usual sounds. Crickets, wind, small branches snapping. But at some point, it felt like those sounds were fading. Like the forest itself was going to sleep. I couldn't fall asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that light, just sitting there. I didn't get why something so small had freaked me out that much. I must have dozed off eventually because around 2 a.m., I woke up because I heard crunching. Slow footsteps in the leaves. I thought it was Tanner taking a leak. But then I realized it was coming from the other direction, downhill, from the ridge. I sat up, trying to listen better, trying to really figure out what I was hearing. Jake was already awake. He asked me if I'd heard it too, but I didn't even need to answer. He knew I had. The steps were slow and careful, like whoever it was didn't want to be heard. Then they stopped, and all I could hear was breathing, faint, just outside the tent. Jake unzipped the tent real slow and stuck his head out with the flashlight. But there was nothing there. Just the trees and the dark. I swear I smelled something though, like wet wool and sweat. Then Tanner whispered from his tent, "Yo, who's out there?" We heard this sudden movement from his tent, like he'd punched the fabric. Whoever it was, took off. Fast. You could hear the crunching of boots crashing through leaves, getting farther away. He immediately came out of his tent and told us someone had been touching his tent, breathing on him. Someone had pressed their face against the tent, and he'd just punched them. As you can probably guess, we didn't sleep after that. We sat up with our knives and the hatchet by the fire pit till the sky turned gray. When morning came, we saw prints, boot prints, big ones, leading right up to our tent, then Tanner's tent, circling it twice, and then heading back toward the ridge. But how the hell had we not seen anyone? Just felt it. Jake had literally stepped out to check, but there was nobody there. We packed up and left as soon as daylight hit. Ate a quick breakfast, and just started moving through the trees toward the car. I remember Tanner kept looking back every few minutes like he expected to see someone following us. When we got back to the trailhead, there was this old beat-up pickup parked next to Jake's car. Nobody inside. And honestly, it looked completely abandoned. It looked miserable, like it had been rotting there for years. But the truth is, when we parked the car, it hadn't been there. I don't know who that was, or what they wanted. Obviously, the pickup might have had nothing to do with whoever messed with us at the campsite. Could have been a hunter. Could have been some crazy dude living off the grid. But that steady light on the ridge, the way it just stared, that's burned into my memory. That's the part that creeps me out the most. Because I swear to everything, it didn't look natural. It looked like it was floating. But yeah, it was nighttime. We were scared. And maybe our minds were trying to make sense of things that weren't really there. The experience wasn't enough to make us stop hiking and camping. But it was enough to make us stop camping in that area and buy a whole set of safety gear, including this little alarm thing that goes off if someone gets too close to the campsite at night. October in the Appalachians is beautiful, and I'd never want to scare anyone away from that area. What I told you is more like proof that there are some crazy things out there, and not every story ends as well as mine. A lot of them don't, and a lot of them we never even hear about. So if you're heading out to that area or anywhere else remote, always be prepared and never go alone. This happened about 4 years ago. Late October, I think. Right before a storm came in. I'd been running on fumes from work and just needed some time away from people. So I packed up my old pickup and drove out toward the southern part of the Appalachians. Not the touristy side, but one of those back roads that eventually turns into dirt and starts to look more like a path than a road. You know the kind, where the GPS starts lagging and the signal drops to nothing. I'd marked a spot on the map that looked like it had a clearing near a river. Figured I'd hike in, set up camp, and just spend a few days off the grid. No plans, no phone, no noise. It was one of those moments in my life when I just needed my brain to shut off. Not thinking about all the things I had to do or the problems I had to solve. It sounded perfect at the time. I remember the drive being long and quiet. Uncomfortably quiet. That was another reason I was seeking silence. I'd always had a hard time being in silence, listening to what my mind had to say when the noise disappeared. Sometime before, I'd had a conversation with a friend who told me something that still bothers me to this day. If we want to be genuinely at peace with ourselves, we have to learn to listen to silence. Well, I had never learned to do that, so I was trying everything I could to figure it out. I finally reached the area where I was going to leave the car and started walking. The trees were half bare, and everything smelled like wet leaves and cold dirt. It was actually pretty pleasant, way more than I expected. Every once in a while, a gust of wind would roll through and shake more leaves down, and it would sound like footsteps somewhere behind you, even though you knew it wasn't. I figured I'd hike maybe an hour before setting up. But that turned into 3 because every spot I found felt wrong somehow. Too close to water, too open, too dead quiet. I could feel my anxiety creeping back, the need to avoid too much noise like by the water, but also not wanting to be somewhere so silent that I could hear my own breathing. It's weird how silence in the woods can feel heavy, like it's pressing down on you. I was really starting to doubt my decision to come there when I finally found a spot up on a rise above a small creek, flat enough to pitch a tent, and far enough from the trail that I couldn't see it anymore. I built a fire, heated up a can of food, and just sat there watching the light bounce off the trees. The moon was bright, but the shadows still looked thick and sharp. I don't know exactly when it started, but sometime after dinner I heard this strange sound. It wasn't an animal or the wind. At least it didn't seem like it. It was this slow, scraping metal sound, like someone dragging a shovel or a crowbar over rock. It came from somewhere near the creek. I froze, just listening, waiting for another noise. But it stopped after a few seconds. I told myself it was probably junk shifting in the current, or maybe a deer stepping on something. But it didn't sit right with me. As you've probably realized by now, I have a lot of anxiety, and even though I'd been hiking many times before, I'd never done it alone. I didn't hear anything else until I got into the tent, but even then, I barely slept that night. Every time I drifted off, I thought I heard footsteps outside. The thing is, when you're an anxious person, you kind of get used to people telling you that you're imagining things, that you're just overreacting, that it's your nerves talking. And honestly, a lot of times that's true. A lot of times the problems really are just in your head. The problem is that sometimes they're not, sometimes they're real. And the hardest part is learning to tell the difference between the two. Despite the anxiety, I dozed off here and there, and eventually the night passed. The next morning, the air felt colder and heavier. You could really tell the weather was changing. There was still about a week to go, but in 8 days there was supposed to be crazy wind and torrential rain. I got out of the tent and looked around. My fire pit looked disturbed, like something had stepped on it. Again, I tried not to overthink it, made some coffee, and went walking upriver to clear my head. After about an hour, I came across this old shack tucked against the hillside. The roof had caved in, the door was missing, and it smelled like mold and rust. I figured it was an old hunting hut or something. But inside, there were fresh signs that someone had been there. A pile of cigarette butts, an empty can of beans that hadn't even rusted, and muddy boot prints. That's when it really hit me. Whoever had been staying there must have come the same way I had, which meant they'd passed near my camp, maybe even watched it. The sound from the creek, the disturbed dirt, it all lined up. It hadn't been just in my head, it was real. I went straight back to my tent, moving fast but trying not to look like I was running. Still, there wasn't really much reason to panic. The person could have just passed near my camp out of curiosity. Even so, it was terrifying to think that someone you don't know had been that close to you while you were at your most vulnerable. But when I got back to camp, I immediately knew something was wrong. The tent flap was open, and I knew I'd closed it. My bag had been moved around a bit. Everything was still there except my knife. I cursed myself automatically. I shouldn't have left the knife there. I should have had it on me. That was stupid. I started packing immediately. My hands were shaking so bad. I dropped things a few times, but I just kept going. That sense that someone's watching you, it's real, man, and it's awful. I got my gear together and started heading back toward the trail. But after a while, nothing looked right anymore. The trees all looked the same. The light was fading, and I couldn't even hear the creek. I knew that my anxiety and fear were stronger than my survival instincts at that point. I knew I needed to focus, calm down, and think clearly. I must have walked in circles for a long while before finally stumbling back onto the path, completely drained. I know that for someone who doesn't struggle with anxiety like I do, it might sound strange, not being able to stay focused in a dangerous situation, but that's just how it is. When I finally reached my truck, I just threw everything in the back and got the hell out. I know that person probably didn't mean me any harm. Maybe they were just some poor soul. But even so, it was a terrifying experience for me. I'm not doing anything like that again anytime soon. I'll try to get more comfortable with my silence, but from home. Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're exploring 3 terrifying stories that took place in the Appalachian Mountains during one of my absolute favorite natural phenomena: thunderstorms. I've been wanting to make a video on this topic for a while now, but I decided to wait and post it today for 2 main reasons. First, October and thunderstorms are the perfect combination. Second, well, it's my birthday, so it just felt like the right time. Thank you so much for being here and for choosing to support this channel. I truly hope you enjoy this video as much as I enjoyed reading and putting these stories together. If you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. What I'm about to tell you happened to me last year, around the middle of October. But before I dive into what actually went down, I just need to give you a little context about why I was even in a place that isolated in the first place. The reason I'm pointing this out is because everything happened during about 2 weeks of massive storms. It rained all day. It rained all night. And this exact week this year, it's been the same way. It hasn't stopped raining or thundering. And I don't really know why, but this weather dragged me right back to that time, and I figured maybe it was time to finally talk about it. Basically, I lived with my parents until I started working in another state, and finally got a little bit of freedom. But about 1.5 years after working there, I ended up getting into a fight with a coworker, and we both got fired. Let me just make it clear. It wasn't entirely my fault. Of course, it was wrong to punch someone at work. It was childish not to control my emotions. But I swear I had reached a point where I just couldn't take it anymore. He was the kind of guy who had been harassing me since day one. He'd pull pranks on me, talk shit about me, mock me. I had never even given him a reason to act that way. We had never talked about anything that could have triggered some weird reaction, and I never treated him badly. But for whatever reason, he developed some kind of obsession with me and wouldn't leave me alone. So after punching him and us getting into a fight right there in the office, we both ended up without jobs. With no real prospects of finding something new right away, I had to move back in with my parents. It was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to get back on my feet and figure something out. But the months kept dragging on and nothing came up that would actually allow me to leave. And the thing is, once you've lived on your own and had your independence, moving back in with your parents is honestly one of the worst things that can happen to a person. One day, I was having coffee with an old high school friend, and he picked up on how miserable I was. That's when he told me about this cabin he owned, right in the middle of the woods, where he usually spent his summers. He'd only go there once a year and stay for 3 months. He basically offered me the place for the winter months, rent-free. All he asked in return was that I kept the place in shape while I was there. I hesitated a little at the idea of being in the middle of nowhere, but at least I could drive right up to the cabin. And like I said, I was desperate. I remember leaving that coffee shop with this rush of excitement, like for the first time in a while, I had a way out. I even walked home in pouring rain, not even caring about getting soaked. 4 days later, I was leaving my parents' house with the car packed and headed straight to the cabin. I had thought about waiting for the storm to calm down a bit, because driving through the woods with low visibility wasn't exactly safe. But the forecast said the storm wasn't going to let up for at least another week, so I figured it was better to just go. Another week trapped in that house with controlling parents, knowing I had an alternative, would have been unbearable. So yeah, 4 days after being handed that escape, I was on the road, driving toward the cabin. The trip would take about 2.5 hours, and since visibility was low and I had to take it slow, I left early in the morning. The road was tough, winding through nothing but forest, and for about an hour I didn't see a single sign of life except for a few isolated places that hinted someone might live out there. When I finally arrived, I couldn't believe how incredible the cabin was. It wasn't nearly as small as I had imagined, and it was fully ready to live in. I can't even explain the rush of pure excitement I felt that first week. I was free from my parents' control, free from that suffocating job, and for the first time in my life, it felt like the forest was giving me a clean slate. Maybe the storm was some kind of sign, a moment of chaos before things finally settled. I was convinced of it. I developed this little routine during that first week. spending my days between exploring the inside of the cabin and wandering around just outside whenever the rain softened enough to actually see the forest. At night, I'd light the fireplace, crack one of the windows open, and just soak in the darkness of the woods, the sound of the storm, and the crackle of the fire. I swear I'd never felt that kind of calm before. It got to the point where I was actually looking forward to nightfall just to hear those sounds. But obviously, the last thing you should ever do out there is keep the windows open at night in the middle of nowhere. The sound was so soothing that one night I actually fell asleep on the couch with the window wide open right above me. I woke up around 4 a.m. to what sounded like something breaking, like glass shattering. And that's when I saw something that froze me to the core. The fireplace was still burning, so its light cast this flickering glow across the floor. And right there, cutting through that glow, were footprints. Footprints I knew weren't mine. They had a clear direction, starting right at the couch where I'd been sleeping, which meant whoever or whatever came in through the window had climbed in right above me. The thought alone sent a kind of fear through me that I'd never felt before. The footprints went toward the fireplace, then toward the smaller couch pushed up against the other window. Whoever had entered had sat there, watching me sleep. Another thought that made my stomach drop. Then the footprints led to the kitchen, the direction of the sound that had woken me up. I snapped out of the initial shock just enough to feel that heavy, unmistakable sensation that someone was still inside with me. I crept toward the fireplace, grabbed the sharpest tool I could find, and crouched in the corner, waiting. That's when I started noticing even more details that made my skin crawl. The footprints were bare, but the shape wasn't normal. They looked warped, twisted. And from the kitchen I could hear this breathing, quick and shallow, mixed with what sounded like a whimper. It was like someone crying, but it wasn't human crying. Not really. I shifted my weight, because my legs were going numb. And without realizing it, I slipped and hit my back against the wall. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough. The breathing stopped, and in the middle of the storm outside, there was this heavy silence filling the cabin, like it was swallowing every bit of sound except the rain and thunder. Then it happened too fast for my brain to keep up. Something, or someone, shot out of the kitchen into the living room and leapt through the window. It was so fast, I barely had time to react. And I swear to God, I had never felt terror like that in my life. It wasn't running upright like a normal person. Or at least, not completely. Its back was arched in this way that reminded me of someone really old. But there's no way someone that old could move like that. That speed, that agility, it wasn't right. It took me several seconds just to process what had happened. But when I finally managed to snap out of it, I ran to the window and slammed it shut. That's when I saw it. In the middle of the darkness, between the trees, two glowing eyes were staring right at me. I locked every window, every shutter. The kitchen was a mess. Two glasses shattered on the floor, and in one of them there was this weird, black, sticky residue. I have no idea what the hell that was, but I spent the entire night on edge, cleaning up everything, wiping away the muddy footprints from the floor, trying to hold myself together. By the time the sun came up, the cabin was spotless, and all my bags were lined up by the door, ready to get the hell out of there. Of course, I told my friend everything, but I honestly don't think he really believes me. All he said was that he'd never seen anything like that out there, but he'd keep an eye out. To this day, I have no idea what I saw that night, but it was without a doubt the most terrifying night of my life. It's funny how clear that night still feels to me, even though it's been, what, 3 autumns now? Must have been mid-October, because the trees up here on the ridge had already gone that deep burnt orange and brown, and you could smell the wood smoke from miles off. We'd had a long stretch of dry days, and when the forecast said a thunderstorm was rolling through, I remember feeling weirdly excited, like a kid again. I've always loved storms. It was something I inherited from my mother. Whenever there was a storm, she was absolutely captivated. She'd stop everything she was doing just to absorb the sound. I remember sitting with her many times doing the same thing. And because of that, whenever there was a storm, I not only loved listening to it, but also felt that warm, cozy sense of nostalgia. Those childhood days when the only worry was playing. It was definitely something I passed on to my kids. Ellie was 9 back then, and Sam had just turned 7. Both of them had that same look in their eyes when they heard thunder, like it was Christmas morning. My wife, Marla, hated it, said storms made her anxious. Anyway, we live way out deep in the Appalachians. Not quite West Virginia, not quite Tennessee, but somewhere in that messy in-between where the roads turn to gravel, and you lose cell signal after the second turn. I'm not exaggerating. That's really how it is out here. Our nearest neighbor's about 5 minutes away by car, maybe more when the road's washed out. We were lucky enough to inherit this house from my parents, who unfortunately both passed away quite young. But the house itself was perfect, ideal for raising our kids. Both Marla and I wanted to bring them up surrounded by nature and far from the chaos of the cities. That night, the sky had been heavy all day. That kind of weird yellow-gray color you get before a storm. Around 8, the wind picked up and the first thunder rumbled across the ridge. The kids came running into the kitchen all smiles, begging to sit out on the back porch to watch it roll in. So we bundled up in hoodies and ran outside just as the first fat drops started to fall. The porch light buzzed, the screen door slammed, and the smell of rain hit. That damp, cold, earthy smell that always means fall's really here. It's definitely one of the best smells in life. Now, the back porch overlooks a big slope down into the woods. Beyond that, nothing but darkness and trees that go for miles. I had my old radio playing low, the kind that still picks up stations from God knows where when the air's right, and we just sat there, me, Sam, and Ellie, listening to thunder crack and roll like it was crawling over the mountains. My wife stayed inside, curled up by the fireplace in her favorite reading spot. At some point, lightning flashed bright enough to light up the whole yard, and Ellie pointed, dead serious, out toward the tree line. "Dad, someone's out there." I laughed at first, mean, it's dark. The rain's playing tricks on your eyes, right? But then another flash hit, and this time I saw something. A shape. I couldn't tell what it was, and I thought it might have just been a tree or a trunk with an odd shape. But I looked closer, fixed my eyes on the spot. And then I saw it again. Looked like a person. Standing still, half hidden by one of the trees at the bottom of the hill. My stomach kinda dropped. If it really was someone, and they'd been watching us, they'd probably realized we'd seen them. The kids started pointing right in that direction, and I kept staring for a long while. I told the kids to go inside and turn on the back floodlights. They didn't argue, just scrambled in through the screen door. I stayed put, waiting. The lights came on, bright white cutting through the rain. But there wasn't anybody there anymore, just empty yard and wet grass bending in the wind. Which meant it wasn't just a weirdly shaped trunk. It was something capable of moving. And scarier than seeing it, there was the fact that it had been there moments before. But now I didn't know where it was. Didn't know if it had gone away or come closer. I told myself it was probably an animal. Hell, maybe even a deer standing weird. Nobody had ever come that close to the house before, but plenty of deer had, so that had to be the explanation. My wife had always loved animals, and sometimes they'd wander closer when she was around. Maybe it was a scared animal looking for shelter from the storm. But I still locked up every door in that house, front and back, and told Marla what we'd seen. I added that we should stay alert, but that there wasn't much reason to think something was wrong. Whatever it was, it had gone away. I felt bad lying to her like that, but I didn't want to ruin the night without a good reason. We settled in for the night, storm still pounding the roof. Watched some dumb Halloween movie with the kids till about 10. Eventually, we got them to bed, or tried to. Not 15 minutes later, Sam came out of his room pale as paper. Said someone was knocking on his window. My whole body tensed, and Marla's face went petrified. Now, you gotta understand. His window faces the woods side of the house. No porch. No easy way to reach it. Meaning no one could possibly just peek in or knock on it. Maybe he was still scared from what he'd seen outside and was making it up just so he wouldn't have to sleep alone. Either way, I wasn't going to ignore what he'd just told me. So I went upstairs to his room. I took the flashlight with me, since by that point the power had already gone out. But when I got to his room, I was absolutely horrified. Lightning flashed again, and for a split second, I swear I saw a man's face. Just a shape. But it was there, right against the glass. I yelled, grabbed my old man's gun, and tore out the back door before Marla could even stop me. Rain coming down sideways, thunder so loud it shook the siding. I ran around to the side, where Sam's room was, but there was nobody there. I stood there for a long moment, looking around, trying to figure out where he'd gone, how he'd even managed to look in through the window. But when I turned toward the front, I saw movement. A man, wearing a hooded coat, slipping around the corner of the house. I ran after him, feet sliding in the mud, heart hammering in my throat. I was obviously terrified, but I wasn't about to let him lay a hand on my family. But by the time I rounded the corner, gone. Just the wind and the sound of the rain. We all stayed in the same room. Marla and I awake, listening for any noise. The kids were in our bed, all of us pretending to sleep, but really just waiting for another knock, another flash, another sound. But nothing else happened. Morning came, and with it, the storm calmed down. For a good 2 weeks afterward, we were all pretty tense. We installed security cameras around the property and reinforced the kids' bedroom windows. But nothing ever happened again. We never saw any man, and we have no idea what he wanted. It's strange how something that shattered my life still smells the same when I think about it. Wet leaves, cold metal, that sharp electrical bite in the air right before a storm breaks. I can close my eyes, and I'm right back there. 15, pissed off at the world, half-packed boots not walking straight into the worst night of my life. Everything I'm about to tell you happened more than 30 years ago, but it changed me forever. Especially the way I react to thunderstorms. Back then, my parents were dirt poor. Hell, everyone in that tiny mountain town was. Poor doesn't even cover it. It was straight up miserable. No real jobs, just endless days working yourself to the bone for scraps. My family wasn't any different. And I guess that's part of why everything went down the way it did that night. It was pouring harder than I'd ever seen. Thunder cracked like it was splitting the sky in half, shaking the paper-thin walls of the piece of shit house we called home. Calling it a house was generous. Parts of it might as well have been outdoors. Rain leaked in through the ceiling. Cold wind slipped through holes, and every storm felt like a fight to keep warm and dry. My dad had just come home from work, pissed off like always, ready to unload on me and my mom. I could tell it was going to be bad the second he stepped inside. There was a way he moved, the way he yanked off his boots, that meant he needed to break something. That night, I was done. Tired to the bone. I wasn't going to let him take it out on me again, and I damn sure wasn't going to watch him lay a hand on her. I told him he was a coward, that none of it was our fault, that he didn't have the right to dump all his shit on us. He let me finish talking. Then the slap came hard and fast. My face lit up with pain, but I didn't cry. I snapped. I shoved him back with everything I had. He stumbled, lost his balance, and smashed the back of his head against the corner of a piece of furniture. Panic hit me like a wave. I thought I'd killed him, but he was still breathing. My mom and I dragged him to the bed. I couldn't handle everything burning inside me. Anger, fear, guilt. It was too much. So I threw the front door open and just ran. We lived out in the Appalachian Mountains in Pennsylvania. Running off in the middle of the night wasn't new for me, but doing it during a storm like that was. I sprinted through the fields, rain soaking through every layer, the sky lighting up in white flashes. Eventually, I got scared of getting hit by lightning, so I stopped under a cluster of trees that offered a bit of cover. I was drenched, shivering, but burning up inside. Without thinking, I let out this scream, raw and furious. I lived in a place where I could scream all I wanted. First, it was almost impossible for anyone to actually hear me. especially with the storm roaring like that. And second, it was night. Nobody went into the woods after dark. Not ever. And definitely not after hearing a scream. I was dead wrong. Not even 30 seconds after the scream, I felt something move on my right. I turned, and there was a man. Hood pulled low, holding something long in his hand. It looked like a baseball bat. And the second I saw him, I just knew. He meant me harm. I tried to step back, but he lunged forward and swung. Then, everything went black. When I came to, my head was pounding. It was dark, and the air smelled foul, mold, rot, something sour. I knew exactly where I was. Not far from my house, there were these old ruins everyone called cursed. People said ghosts roamed there. But what scared us more than ghosts was the fact that it was falling apart. The only thing still standing was the shell of an old church. I'd been there before, with some friends. My wrists burned like fire. I realized my hands were tied behind my back with some kind of rough rope. It dug into my skin, too tight. Like whoever did it wanted to make sure I didn't move an inch. Then I heard a voice, and realized I wasn't alone. I couldn't make out what was being said, just the tone. I knew that voice, which made it worse. The door creaked open, slow and heavy, and I heard footsteps fading away. Then daylight slammed into me like a punch. It burned through my eyes, sharp and blinding, and my head felt like it was splitting in two. I don't know how long I stayed there after that. Soaked to the bone, teeth chattering, every muscle locked up. The silence pressed down on me, thick and cold. Nobody came back. It was just me, tied up, waiting for something I couldn't even name. I honestly thought I was gonna die there. Nobody ever came through that area, not unless it was some hunter cutting through the woods, and even that was rare. And it sure as hell wasn't hunting season. Outside, the storm was still raging, pounding against the broken walls like it wanted in. I remember lying there, tied up, soaked, and freezing, knowing no one was coming. Then, finally, the door opened again and a man stepped inside. For a split second, I felt pure terror, and then relief. It was Mr. Buck, our closest neighbor. He was the kind of guy who'd give us potatoes when we couldn't afford dinner. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe he'd been the one who took me. But the panic in his voice killed that thought fast. He was there to help. He rushed to untie me, asking questions I couldn't even process. Who did this? What happened? How long had I been there? I couldn't answer. I just kept whispering, "Thank you," and begging him to hurry. Then the door slammed open again. Another man, the same shadow I'd seen in the woods, was there. The second he saw us, he bolted. Mr. Buck almost ran after him, but I grabbed him with what little strength I had left. I begged without words, and he stayed. He took me home. My mom was sobbing when she saw me, wrapping herself around me like she could keep me from vanishing again. My dad started to raise his voice, until Buck shut him down with a look and a few hard words. There was no police report, no search. No one even knocked on a door to ask what happened. People around there didn't want to get involved. They didn't want trouble. They didn't want their names in anything. So everyone just went quiet, like it never happened. And that was it. Nothing was done. That was it. My parents died young. The house is still there, rotting like it always did. I only went back once, to help Mr. Buck when he was old and alone. One time I asked him how he'd even managed to find me, and he said my mom had shown up at his door, crying and begging for help. My dad couldn't have cared less if I lived or died, so she went to the only person she trusted. Buck told me he'd spent the whole damn night out there searching for me, wandering through the woods with nothing to go on. Any tracks that might have been there were already washed away by the storm. He said he only passed by the old ruins by sheer luck. For a second, he figured maybe I'd run off and taken shelter in the church. He never once thought I'd been kidnapped. I asked him if he had any idea who it was. He said he had his suspicions, and if he was right, that man had been rotting in the ground for a long time. After he passed, whatever tie I still had to that place died with him. I've never gone back. I don't plan to. Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're sharing 3 absolutely disturbing stories from people who were in the Appalachian Mountains during the first week of November. That time right after Halloween, when the air turns cold and the woods start to feel genuinely gloomy. There's something about that shift, when the nights grow longer and the silence in the forest feels heavier. In my opinion, these stories capture that feeling perfectly. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. Alright, so I guess this is my turn to finally talk about what happened out there. I've kept quiet for years, partly because I didn't think anyone would believe me, and partly because I didn't want to believe it myself. But the truth is, something went down in those Appalachian woods that still messes with my head every damn day. And it wasn't ghosts, or creatures, or anything supernatural. This was human, and absolutely terrifying. It was early November of 2019. The air had that sharp bite that makes your lungs sting a little when you breathe in too deep. The trees were half bare, the leaves on the ground damp and sticking to my boots, and the sky had that gray look it gets right before winter takes over for good. I'd just gotten out of a rough breakup and needed to clear my head. I'd been hiking most of my life. Grew up in Virginia, not far from Shenandoah, and I figured a few days alone in the mountains would do me good. No phone service, no noise, and no people. Just me, the trees, and some peace. Or that's what I thought I was getting myself into. I'd done several trails in those mountains before and never had any major problems. Of course, I'd run into the occasional creep, or those people who were clearly under the influence of something. But nothing serious. The first 2 days were fine. The ground was slightly wetter, and therefore more challenging than it would have been if I'd done this in the summer, but still manageable. Cold, quiet, but fine. The kind of quiet that makes you feel small but calm, you know? I had my little tent, my gear, food packed for 5 days. I set up camp near this old fire tower that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The steps were half rotted, and someone had carved words into the railings. Random names and dates, the usual graffiti you find out there. But one carving stood out. It just said, "We watched you sleep." I remember thinking it was creepy, sure, but figured it was some dumb joke left by teenagers. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like footsteps outside my tent. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon rummaging through my food bag. The wind was light, just enough to make the trees creak. I reached for my flashlight, but before I could unzip the tent, the sound stopped and it was dead quiet again. Not even the wind made a sound. That silence hit hard. Anyone who's been deep in the woods knows that feeling. Something's off. I stayed still for a long time, listening. But after several long minutes with nothing happening, I went back to sleep. The next morning, frost covered everything and my food bag was gone. Not torn up, not dragged off, just gone. Rope cut clean. Whoever took it knew what they were doing. I found a few bare footprints in the dirt near the tree where I'd hung it. Small ones, and another set that looked bigger and wider. It was annoying, sure, but I wouldn't say it was terrifying. I mean, yeah. It's always unsettling knowing someone got close enough to your camp while you were asleep, especially if they stole food. But it wasn't exactly uncommon. It had happened to me a few times before, so I didn't freak out. I had extra energy bars and sealed stuff packed in another bag anyway. I always came prepared for that kind of thing. By mid-afternoon, I started hearing movement off the trail. The kind of sound that's not constant, but just enough to let you know you're not alone. A branch breaking, a soft rustle, like someone taking a careful step. The light was fading early, the way it does in November. That weird in-between where it feels like night even though it's only 4 o'clock. I tried to shrug it off, but then I noticed something else. Pieces of my gear, stuff I hadn't even unpacked yet, were missing when I set up camp that night. A small knife, my backup lighter, even my headlamp. Just gone. Could it be that they hadn't only stolen my food? The only time of day I'd set my things down had been by a creek to cool my hands and neck. At that time, I'd heard a noise nearby, but when I looked toward where my stuff was, I didn't see anyone. Still, my gut told me that the theft the night before hadn't been an isolated thing. I'd heard footsteps around me, small noises, and together it painted a picture that I was being followed. Even without concrete proof, our instincts often know what they're doing. Even when our brain tries to come up with logical explanations, instinct exists for a reason. When you're in the middle of nowhere, you need to listen to it. That night, I barely slept. The cold made my breath fog up inside the tent, and every sound felt amplified. I kept telling myself I'd hike out the next morning, cut the trip short, call it what it was, a bad vibe. But before sunrise, I woke up again. This time, I wasn't alone. I could hear breathing. Slow, steady breathing, just outside the tent. I didn't move. Didn't even dare to blink. The breathing stopped after maybe 10 seconds, and then I heard someone whisper something that sounded like, "Don't look." When I finally worked up the nerve to unzip the tent, there was no one there. But on the ground, right outside the flap, was my knife, stuck blade first into the dirt, the same one that had gone missing the day before. I couldn't make sense of it. Had they regretted it and come to return things? Or maybe one of them had changed their mind. I really can't find any meaning in what I saw that morning. All I know is that I packed up in under 10 minutes and started hiking out. I didn't eat, didn't stop for water. I just wanted out. The cold morning air burned my lungs as I climbed uphill, but I didn't care. Every sound behind me felt like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like someone breathing down my neck. And the feeling of being followed never left. I know a big part of it could have been just in my head, but I've always preferred to play it safe. So I just kept walking. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of movement through the trees. Always behind me, always at a distance. Once, I turned around fast enough to see someone duck behind a tree. That's when I got confirmation that it wasn't in my head. I saw him. I was being followed by a man. I just told him not to come any closer, that I was armed, and I kept walking. Now at a much faster pace than before. Around noon, I reached a section of trail where it split in two. Left toward the ridge, right toward the main road. The signpost was missing, but I remembered my map well enough to know which way was out. As I stood there catching my breath, I saw something that still gives me chills. Hanging from a branch right above the trail marker was my food bag, the same one that had been stolen. Clean, tied back up, like it was being returned. I didn't even touch it. I didn't want to know what was inside, or how they'd gotten that far ahead of me to hang it there. Just like that morning, it didn't make any sense. They were clearly having fun with me. My only hope was that this fun would stay that way, and not turn into something much worse and more frightening. Then, from far away, I heard someone say, "Run," and I ran. I knew that word was meant for me, and I knew I was being hunted. I ran until I couldn't anymore. Only then did I stop to catch my breath, then kept going. By the time I reached the parking lot hours later, the sun was already setting. The air had that biting cold that creeps into your bones. I was shaking so bad I could barely start my car. I filed a report that night with the local sheriff. They took it seriously at first, asked me a bunch of questions, checked the lot, the trailhead, everything. A week later, the deputy called me back and said there was no evidence of criminal activity. They said if they got any other reports like mine, or if any lead came up, they'd let me know. Honestly, it didn't seem like one of those cases where they just didn't care. It seemed like they were genuinely interested and really tried to help me. But whoever had followed me in the forest knew what they were doing, and knew how to leave no trace. That was the last I heard from them. It's been 6 years now, and I haven't been back to those mountains. I still hike, but never alone. And sometimes, when I'm out in the woods, I get that same eerie silence again. That same feeling that something's just out of sight. And yes, it's a dramatic thing to say. But that doesn't make it any less real for someone who went through what I feel I went through. I moved to a small house in West Virginia more than 15 years ago. Back then, I was quiet, introverted, the kind of guy who preferred silence and space over people. I'd grown up with my grandparents, helping them on their farm, and hard work never bothered me. If anything, it gave me a sense of peace. At that time, buying my own property wasn't even close to possible. So when an opportunity came up, I took it right away. A couple who owned a massive farm was looking for someone to manage the daily work, feeding the animals, maintaining the land, keeping things running. In exchange, they offered me a place to live, a converted storage building on the edge of their property, plus a decent paycheck. It sounded like the perfect setup. I could save money, live quietly, and learn even more about running a farm. The couple seemed kind enough at first. A little odd, yes, but polite. The farm was huge, so even though I technically worked for them, I could go days without seeing either of them. For the first 2 years, things went smoothly. I did my work, got paid, and minded my business. But the truth is, from the moment I met them, something didn't sit right with me. It wasn't anything obvious, just a strange feeling that lingered in the air whenever I was near them. I almost turned down the job because of it. Fast forward 2 years, and I was living what most people would call a simple, peaceful life. Until one night, everything changed. I've always been into reading real-life crime stories and strange personal accounts on Reddit. I don't know why, but there's something about reading other people's experiences that pulls me in. One evening, I came across a post that caught my attention. The person described a situation eerily similar to mine. They talked about living on a farm, working for a couple who behaved oddly, and staying in a converted outbuilding. It was so close to my own life that I couldn't stop reading. Then the story got darker. The writer said they'd heard screaming one night coming from the main house and decided to investigate. I remember my heart sinking as I read. Every word felt too specific, too real. The description of the farm, the layout of the house, even the monthly reports the caretaker had to give. It was identical to my situation. It was like reading my own life on someone else's screen. The post was 2 years old. I couldn't get it out of my head, so I decided to find out who had written it. A friend of mine, someone who knew their way around the internet, managed to trace the old email behind the account. I wrote to the person, asking if what they'd written was true. It might sound strange, but 15 years ago, the internet was a very different place from what it is now. Days later, I got a short reply. It said, "It was just a story. Please don't contact me again." But the tone didn't sound dismissive. It sounded scared. That was enough to push me over the edge. The descriptions were too precise to be made up. And the part that haunted me most, the writer claimed they'd discovered something underground, a hidden basement, completely sealed off, where people were being kept. After that, I couldn't sleep properly. Every night I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was living on the same property. I found myself reading the story over and over again, noticing more details each time. Then, one weekend, the couple told me they'd be out of town for a few days, and I just knew that that was my chance. When their car disappeared down the long dirt road, I waited about an hour, then walked up to the main house. Obviously, the front door was locked tight. I was even prepared to make it look like a break-in, to stage an attempted robbery, just to prove how obsessive I'd become. The house was old, but unbelievably luxurious. There was no way a farm could be that profitable, or could it? And when I say luxury, I mean extreme luxury. I checked every room: the kitchen, the living room, their bedroom. Nothing seemed out of place. But I knew I was just stalling, avoiding what I really needed to do. Heading toward the kitchen, the area that led down below, to the basement where, supposedly, hell itself existed. I decided it had to be now or never. I went back to the kitchen and pushed open the door that led down to the basement, barely visible. I pulled it open, and a narrow staircase led down into the dark. The smell hit me halfway down. Something foul. Like rot mixed with rust. The air was damp and heavy. When I reached the bottom, I realized this wasn't a regular basement. The contrast with the rest of the house was staggering. An absolute shock. The walls were concrete, and the only light came from a single bulb hanging by a wire. The door had to be completely forced open, but I finally managed to get it. There were two men down there. They were crouched in the corner, both of them filthy and shaking. Their skin was grayish, their faces hollow. They looked like they hadn't eaten properly in weeks. They looked at me like they were staring at a monster, completely terrified. Neither of them spoke English. I kept saying, "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you," over and over, hoping they'd understand. After a few seconds, I pointed toward the stairs and stepped aside. They hesitated, then just bolted. I followed them up, and when we got outside, they ran through the fields, barefoot, straight toward the line of trees at the edge of the property. I could see the bruises on their backs, dark and deep. Before disappearing into the woods, they turned around and bowed, just slightly, like they were thanking me. That broke me. My legs gave out, and I remember sitting there in the dirt, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't understand what I'd just seen, but I knew I had to do something. I went back inside, desperate to find proof. Papers, photos, anything that would expose those monsters. But there was nothing. Every drawer, every cabinet was empty. It was like the house belonged to two completely normal people. Sweet, even. After that, everything happened way too fast. I was in what looked like an office, going through the drawers, when I heard the distant sound of a car and the front gate opening. They were back. I ran out the back door, through the fields. I didn't grab anything from my place, not even my ID. I knew they'd realize I'd been inside their house. I just kept running until I reached the main road and called a friend who lived a few towns away. He picked me up, and I stayed at his place that night. But around 4 in the morning, someone knocked on his door. 2 men. They said they were police officers. I actually felt relieved for a second. I thought maybe I could finally report what I'd found. But as soon as he opened the door, they forced their way in. They beat us both until everything went black. Before I lost consciousness, one of them leaned close to my ear and said, "If you talk, next time you won't get a warning." I have no idea how they found me there, but the truth is, they did. That was more than 15 years ago. Since then, I've changed my name twice. I've moved across different states, lived under the radar, always looking over my shoulder. I sent anonymous reports to the police years ago, but nothing ever came of it. From what I've heard, the farm's been abandoned for over a decade now. No one knows what happened to the couple. Maybe they packed up and moved their operations somewhere else. Maybe they were caught and silenced. Maybe they're still out there, living quietly, pretending to be just another elderly pair in the countryside. All I know is that I still see those men's faces when I close my eyes. Their hollow eyes, the bruises, the way they bowed before running into the woods. And I still wonder, every single night, if they ever made it out alive. My parents still own a cabin in the lower Appalachians, a few miles outside a town that barely exists anymore. When I was little, that area was full of families. People kept gardens, had bonfires, everyone knew each other. You could hear laughter from the lake on summer nights. Then, in 2002, 2 women were killed on the ridge, just a couple of miles from our place. The guy who did it was never caught. After that, people stopped coming. Houses were left empty. Within a few years, it felt like most of the hollow had just given up. We stopped going as much too. My parents tried to keep it up, but the roof started to sag. The road to the house washed out a little every winter, and there just wasn't any reason to go. By the time I left for college, it was basically sitting empty, except for the few times my dad went to check it after a storm. A few years later, they decided to rent it. Nobody wanted to live there, but eventually a couple from town agreed to take it. Their names were Leonard and Elsie. They were older, maybe late 60s. He was the type that always looked angry about something. Thin, pale, always wearing the same flannel jacket. People in town said he yelled at his wife a lot. My mom didn't like the idea, but my dad said beggars can't be choosers, and it was better to have someone paying rent than let the place rot. For a while, everything seemed fine. Leonard kept to himself. He fixed the fence, mowed the grass. The neighbors said they barely saw Elsie anymore. Then, out of nowhere, they moved out. Didn't leave a note or call. They just packed up and left. My parents figured he must have found somewhere cheaper closer to town. About a year after that, we all went back together. It was November, cold and gray. The kind of cold that seeps into everything. The plan was just to stay a few nights, check if the pipes had held through the last winter, and maybe decide whether to sell the place. My sister brought our cat, Willow. She was gentle, the kind of cat that made friends with everyone. My mom said she'd keep the place from feeling so empty. The first couple of days were normal. The house smelled musty, but familiar. We spent the day cleaning, went into town for supplies, that kind of thing. Then, on the 3rd morning, we found Willow lying under the back steps, twitching, drooling. My mom started crying before anyone could even speak. My sister grabbed her and ran for the car. She drove faster than I've ever seen her drive in my life. The vet said it was rat poison. Said she'd have died within an hour if my sister hadn't gotten her there that fast. We didn't keep poison in the cabin. Never had. We didn't even have traps. The vet said the amount was deliberate and definitely not an accident. After that, things started feeling wrong. We noticed cigarette butts in the driveway that hadn't been there before. The motion light over the porch came on in the middle of the night even when there was no wind. Once, my dad found muddy boot prints by the side door. He said it was probably from the plumber who came by earlier in the year, but the prints looked fresh. A few nights later, something hit the side of the house. Not loud, just one hard thump, like a boot against the wall. When we checked outside, the porch light flicked on. The yard was empty, but I swear I could smell smoke, like someone had just been standing there. My mom didn't sleep at all that night. She kept checking the windows. The next morning, my dad found the basement door cracked open. It was locked from the inside when we'd arrived. He didn't say anything, but I could tell it rattled him. We cut the trip short. We packed up that afternoon. The morning we left, we noticed the lock on the back door was broken. It had been pried open. Inside, nothing was taken. But the air felt stale, colder somehow. My mom said it smelled like cigarettes again. A week later, the sheriff called. He said a neighbor had seen Leonard's old pickup parked near the end of our road at night. The man hadn't spoken to anyone, just sat there in the dark for hours. They tried to find him afterward, but the truck was gone. No record of where he went. My parents haven't been back since. The house still stands, but no one lives there. The porch light's probably still broken. Willow's still alive. She has a small scar on her side from where they had to treat her, but she's fine. I try not to think too much about that. I don't believe in curses or ghosts. But sometimes, when I picture that cabin, I see it how it looks now. Empty, half swallowed by trees, the road nearly gone. And I wonder if maybe Leonard never left the ridge. The story I'm about to tell happened over 30 years ago, and for the longest time, I buried it deep in my memory. It was painful to see how no one ever believed me. People called me crazy, said I just wanted attention. So, I did what anyone would do. I shoved those memories into a dark corner of my mind and tried to move on. But even after all these years, I never stopped paying attention, always on the lookout for any news, any messages on obscure forums, anything that might explain or help me make sense of what I saw that night. The reason I'm telling this story now? I found a post on a forum. Some guy said he stumbled upon a file he wasn't supposed to see, something pointing to the existence of something. Something nobody had ever spoken about before. I reached out to him, and that's when I knew. I wasn't crazy. He had proof. He was just as desperate as I was to find out more. It all went down in the summer of '93. My dad and I were road tripping through southern Nevada in his old but reliable van. Man, I loved that thing. Loved those trips. These days, with the whole van life craze, I can't help but feel nostalgic. My dad's gone now, but he left me a massive collection of books, stuff about everything under the sun. A lot of it was the kind of thing people laugh at, say it's all nonsense. He was obsessed with conspiracy theories, always digging into things most folks just wrote off as pure fantasy. Deep down, I think he knew it was probably all just stories, but I guess he liked having an escape from his own reality. That summer, while driving through Nevada, he couldn't resist pulling over near Area 51 to set up camp for the night. I remember being so hyped. My dad had filled my head with wild stories about the place, but when we got there, I felt nothing but disappointment. There was nothing to see. Just a bunch of warning signs, some fences, security cameras, and way off in the distance, a single shack sitting in the middle of the desert. Nowadays, I know everything happens underground, but back then, it was hard to picture. We sat by the tiny camping stove my dad always brought with him. As he made dinner, he kept the stories going, tales about terrifying creatures, aliens that supposedly lived beneath our feet. We hadn't even been sitting there 5 minutes when red lights flooded the van. My dad told me not to worry, that they were just checking us out, making sure we weren't a threat. Nothing to be scared of, he said. After a while, the lights shut off, and we were left in the pitch-black desert, just us and his stories. Then he said he was going for a walk, told me to stay inside, no matter what noises I heard. He wouldn't be long. But he was. And I sat in that van, terrified out of my mind, listening to the sounds outside. I couldn't see a damn thing with the curtains drawn, but I could hear everything. Some noises sounded mechanical, others natural, like animals moving around. But the one thing I remember most was the ground, how it trembled. Not like an earthquake, more like a constant, low vibration. Like a giant truck rolling past, over and over again. By the time my dad came back, I had no idea how much time had passed. But the second I saw him, I knew something was wrong. His face, his movements, he was shaken. And my dad never got shaken. He told me it was time to sleep. I tried asking what had happened, but he just said everything was fine. We'd be leaving in the morning, and no matter what, I was not to open that van door. If I heard anything weird, I had to wake him up immediately. The look in his eyes told me not to push for answers. Then came 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep. That tremor had started up again. That weird, almost rhythmic shaking. And the noises, low, mechanical. I sat up in bed, careful not to wake my dad, who was sleeping like a rock. I thought about opening the van door, just for a second. But I knew better. If my dad caught me, I'd either get my ass beat or be sent straight home. So instead, I did something just as bad. I lifted one of the blinds. I didn't know exactly what I was expecting to see, but at first, there was nothing. Just the same endless stretch of desert, silent, empty, completely lifeless. No movement, no shadows, nothing but the wind scraping against the sand. And then, I heard it. I can't even explain it. It was too fast, too sudden. First, there was this high-pitched sound, sharp, drilling into my skull like it was digging straight into my brain. Then came the mechanical noise, followed by a soft clinking, like glass bottles knocking against each other beneath the window. I was completely caught off guard by what I saw next. A face. It wasn't human, and it wasn't an animal. It was something in between. And it was staring straight into my eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The body looked animalistic, hunched and unnatural. But those eyes were human. Then, out of nowhere, a gunshot and a sound. Something between a scream and metal grinding against metal. I wish I could describe it better, but no matter how hard I try, I've never heard anything like it again in my life. And just like that, the thing took off, running so fast, it barely looked real. 3 jeeps came speeding after it, their headlights slicing through the darkness. By the time my dad woke up and looked outside, they were already far and gone. Needless to say, no one ever believed me. And over the years, I got really good at shoving those eyes back into the deepest, darkest corners of my mind. Until now. Now, I can't ignore what I saw anymore. Hey, horror spectator here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you're always in the loop when new videos drop. We post 2 videos every week. If you're really into this content, consider sharing it with your friends. It really helps us grow this community. Now, let's move on to the second story. I never wanted to be involved in any of this. If I could go back and change that day, I would. But once you see something you're not supposed to, once you know something you shouldn't, there's no undoing it. You just have to live with it. Or try to, at least. It was 1998. I was working as a contractor for a defense company. Nothing glamorous, just logistics. My job was making sure equipment, supplies, and classified materials got where they needed to go. Most of the time, I didn't ask questions. I learned early on that asking questions only made things harder. If you wanted to keep your job, you did what you were told and didn't think too much about it. One day, I was assigned to a shipment going to Nevada. They didn't give me many details, just that I'd be driving a truck with highly sensitive cargo and that I was to follow all orders exactly. I had done jobs like this before. Restricted sites, high security. But this one was different. The clearance level was higher and the briefing was unusually strict. They made me sign extra NDAs and warned me that any deviation from protocol would have consequences. We drove through the night, a convoy of 3 trucks escorted by black SUVs. The route was carefully planned, avoiding major highways. We took back roads, cutting through miles of empty desert. By the time we arrived, the sun was coming up, casting a dull orange glow over the mountains. That's when I realized where we were. Area 51. I had heard all the stories, of course. Everyone had. But standing there, looking at the unremarkable entrance with a simple guard post and a few cameras, it felt different. Real. I wasn't supposed to feel anything. Wasn't supposed to be curious. But something about the place made my stomach twist. We were told to park inside a massive hangar. A few guards stood by as men in hazmat suits approached. They ordered us out of the trucks, had us stand in a line while they checked the cargo. I wasn't worried. I didn't know what we were hauling, and I didn't want to know. But then, something went wrong. One of the men inspecting the shipment shouted something I couldn't hear. The energy in the room changed instantly. The guards stiffened, hands moving toward their weapons. The men in hazmat suits scrambled, opening one of the crates faster than they should have. And then the smell hit me. It was awful. Chemical, metallic, and something else I couldn't place. Something rotten. A sound followed. Something soft and wet, like flesh shifting unnaturally. One of the hazmat men stumbled back, tripping over himself. His face, what little I could see of it through the clear visor, had drained of color. I wasn't supposed to see inside that crate. But in the chaos, I did. It looked human. Or at least, close to it. But something was wrong. The body was pale, almost sickly looking, with visible scarring across the torso. It wasn't moving. At least, I don't think it was. The sight of it sent a chill through me, but before I could process anything, someone grabbed me. I didn't even realize I had stepped forward until the guard yanked me back. Another man, someone in a suit, came out of nowhere. He was calm, cold. He leaned in close and said, "You didn't see anything. Understand?" Before I could fully process what I had seen, a man in a suit appeared, moving with the kind of precision that made it clear he was in charge. Without a word, he pressed a clipboard into my hands, the weight of it making my fingers tighten instinctively around the edges. At the bottom of the page, there was a space for my signature. No explanation, no discussion. Just an expectation. I hesitated, but only for a moment. The air around me had shifted, thick with something unspoken, yet unmistakable. This wasn't a request. It wasn't even an order. It was a formality. A final step in something already decided. My name went onto the page with a quick, uneven scrawl. The clipboard was gone before I had even let go of the pen. The man didn't linger, didn't wait for acknowledgement. But before he turned away, he made sure I understood. There was no need for raised voices or elaborate threats. The message was clear in the way he looked at me, in the way the others moved around him with quiet efficiency. There would be no second warnings. I nodded, my heart pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out. They pulled us all aside, ran us through decontamination, questioned us one by one. I stuck to my story. I didn't see anything, didn't know anything, just a driver doing his job. Eventually, they let me go. But the last thing they told me stuck with me. There will be no second warnings. I never worked another job like that again. I got out, changed careers, moved states. For a long time, I convinced myself it didn't matter. That whatever I saw was just a bad memory, a mistake, something my mind twisted into something worse than it was. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that crate, about the thing inside it, and I wonder, where did it come from? What was it for? And worst of all, was it really dead? A few years ago, I found myself in Nevada again, driving through the same lonely highways. I don't know what drew me back, curiosity, nostalgia, maybe just bad luck. But as I passed the endless stretches of desert, I noticed something strange. A convoy of black SUVs, just like the ones from that night, speeding down a back road. They weren't escorting trucks this time, just a single, windowless van. I watched them disappear into the horizon, a familiar unease settling over me. I don't know if I'll ever get real answers. Maybe I don't want them. But I do know one thing. Whatever they were doing back then, they're still doing it now. And some things are better left unseen. On September 16th, 1991, something happened in my life that made me experience fear in a way I never thought possible. It wasn't just any kind of fear. It was a deep, overwhelming dread that shook everything I was, and somehow it shaped who I am today. From that moment on, I had to completely change my life. My name, my identity, the country I lived in. I left everything behind, even the people I knew. Friends, family, acquaintances. I had to start from scratch, with no ties to my past. And only now, after all these years, do I feel brave enough to tell this story. Even now, I do so under complete anonymity, as if the shadow of that night still chases me. Since I was a kid, I was always an introvert, someone who preferred silence over the company of others. This part of me made me a target for bullying, mostly because I was smarter than the other kids my age. The truth, though hard to accept, is that most kids who bully do so because they feel inferior and use aggression to cover up their own insecurities. The same thing happens in adulthood. But back then, what I knew was that knowledge was the only thing I had. No friends, no family support. Only school, classes, and books. And it was in those things that I found refuge, diving headfirst into my studies, looking for something that would give me meaning and purpose. At 17, something important happened. I entered a math competition at school, a contest that highlighted the brightest young minds. At the end, after I had won, a mysterious man approached me. He talked to me about a unique opportunity, if I was willing to work hard, I could have everything I ever wanted. He told me about the military, a full scholarship for college, and a high salary, way above average. For someone like me, coming from a poor family with no prospects, and being the first to have the chance to go to college, it seemed like a dream come true. My parents didn't hesitate for a second. When I told them, they quickly gave their blessing. And so, I enlisted in the military. The years in the military were smooth, even comfortable, as long as I followed orders without questioning them. The reward for that was the benefits offered: a stable, secure life. Over time, my area of expertise evolved into genetics, and I began working in an innovative and mysterious field where knowledge was power. I spent 7 years developing studies and experiments focused on the genetic improvement of various species. However, without going into too many technical details, I should say that the main goal of my research was improving living organisms, making animals stronger, faster, and smarter. The ultimate goal was something even more ambitious. Perhaps in the distant future, genetically modified humans. The work we did was fascinating, but at the same time, disturbing. And ultimately, it led me to an even more unsettling place: Area 51. I loved what I did. Science was something I was deeply passionate about. However, as time passed, I began questioning the ethical implications of it all. A growing sense of discomfort started to consume me, a feeling that I tried to ignore, but couldn't shake. I talked to some colleagues about it, but none of them seemed genuinely concerned. In fact, the last colleague who raised questions about what we were doing simply disappeared without a trace. Things started to feel even stranger and unsustainable. But my need for answers grew, and one fateful day, I made a decision that would change my life forever. On the night of September 16th, 1991, I took action. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, I stole my supervisor's access card, a card that would allow me to enter highly restricted areas of Area 51, places where no other employee, except for the highest-ranking officials, was allowed to go. I knew that by doing this, I was risking everything, but curiosity, the need to understand what was behind all the secrecy, left me with no choice. What I found behind those doors was something I never imagined could exist. In that lab, inside huge glass tubes submerged in mysterious liquids, were creatures that looked like they came straight out of a nightmare. Animals and life forms that I couldn't even identify. What I saw in that space, what I saw inside those tubes, were things that defy any rational explanation. I knew that what I was witnessing was something beyond the limits of possibility, something that no one should ever see. And it was at that moment, in a desperate impulse, that I decided to quickly return to the lab. Instead of running, I chose to lie down on the floor and pretend that I had been affected by a gas released into the environment as part of an experiment. I knew this was a risky move, but my only hope was that no one would notice anything strange. My first mistake was not realizing that all access in those facilities was strictly controlled. My supervisor would be questioned about entering that area, and being the only one there, my presence at that hour would eventually become the key to exposing my actions. My second mistake, the most serious, was believing they would swallow the lie that I was there by accident. They weren't fools. My life turned into a nightmare. I was interrogated, tortured. The accusation was clear. I was a spy, someone trying to steal precious secrets. I underwent tests and experiments that I don't even know how I survived. But there was a glimmer of hope in the chaos. A colleague, someone who had witnessed my attempt to escape, outraged by what was happening, decided to help me. He did the impossible to get me out of there, and against all odds, I managed to escape. I never knew what happened to him. But unfortunately, I live with the guilt of knowing that he probably didn't survive and risked everything to help me. I spent months on the run, always on the fringes of society. I avoided the big cities, hiding out in mountains and national parks, always terrified of being found. Finally, I managed to cross the border and get to Canada. And from that moment on, I disappeared completely from the map, severing all ties with the world I once knew. Looking back today, my life has never been the same. Fear, distrust became integral parts of my existence. The way I see the world has changed forever, and although I never fully understood what was really going on behind that door, one thing I know for sure is that whatever it wasn't right. And in the end, despite everything that happened, I feel a strange sense of satisfaction knowing I'm no longer part of that dark world. The story I'm about to tell happened over 25 years ago. And the reason I'm sharing it is because I feel like the case has been completely forgotten, and because I need to warn people to never let their guard down. Pay attention to your friend groups, to the people close to you, and most importantly, never ignore it when your gut tells you something is wrong. At the time, the case was all over the media, and I don't want to go through that again. For the sake of this account, I won't mention exact locations or use the real names of the people involved. However, everything else happened exactly as I'm about to describe. I've always had some difficulty making friends. I was a shy girl, and many people mistook my shyness for rudeness. When I started college, I met Leah, one of the funniest, most outgoing girls I had ever known. We became good friends, and little by little, I became part of her friend group, a group she had known since freshman year. The idea of belonging to a group like that was something I had only dreamed of, so when the opportunity came, I grabbed onto it with everything I had. The group was amazing, and I loved everyone. But there was one guy, let's call him Robert, who always made me uncomfortable. He had never done anything to me, but something about him gave me chills, and not in a good way. The summer after our sophomore year of college, the group planned to spend a week in a cabin in the Great Smoky Mountains and hike part of the Appalachian Trail in that area. I had never been very adventurous, and I don't remember ever having gone hiking or camping before that summer, but I didn't hesitate to say yes. The trip to the cabin is one of my best memories. Everyone had fun on the drive there, and even the hike to the cabin, though exhausting, was fantastic. I remember thinking Robert seemed particularly excited, more than I had ever seen him before, and I started to wonder if I had misjudged him. The week was planned down to the smallest detail. Michael, one of the guys in the group, loved making plans and lists, so he took care of everything for us. The idea was to hike several trails, and on the third day, tackle one of the biggest ones in the area. That hike would require spending the night outdoors in tents to reach a specific part of the trail. I had never camped before, and the idea seemed exciting to me. However, by the second day, I started feeling the first symptoms of something. I had a slight fever, or at least I thought I did, but no one had brought a thermometer. So, as a group, we decided I would stay at the cabin while the others went on the hike. Leah protested, saying it didn't make sense for me to stay alone, but I didn't want them to miss out because of me. Besides, if I was really sick, it was better for them not to stay with me and risk getting sick too. That's when Robert said not to worry because he would stay behind as well. He explained that he wasn't feeling great and didn't want to slow them down. The way he said it, and the smile he gave me right after made my stomach clench. Something felt off. Maybe his eyes, maybe his smile, maybe just an innate instinct of danger. But I ignored that feeling, smiled back, and let it go. I didn't want to ruin the mood, and I had no proof that anything was wrong. The next morning, the others left. Leah came to my room, gave me a tight hug, and asked if I was sure I'd be okay. Later, I found out that she too had felt uncomfortable around him. I told her yes, not to worry, and forced my best smile. The day went fine. There were awkward moments of silence between me and Robert, but nothing that truly alarmed me. When night fell and I started feeling a little worse, I decided to go to bed. He smiled at me, that same eerie smile, and wished me good night. Since we arrived, I had never locked my bedroom door, but that night, instinct took over. Without a second thought, I closed and locked it as a precaution. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to a soft knock on the door. It was Robert. Casually, he asked if I could give him a painkiller for his headache. I told him Leah had left a first aid kit in the kitchen. There was a brief silence on the other side, almost imperceptible, but it sent a shiver down my spine. Then, he thanked me and walked away. Not even 30 minutes later, he knocked again. He said what he took hadn't worked and asked for another pill. That didn't make sense. He knew he couldn't take 2 different medications in such a short time. I explained that to him, and once again, there was silence from the other side of the door. He was clearly trying to get me to open it one way or another. Then, in an extremely aggressive tone, he demanded that I open the door and give him the pill. At that moment, I knew something was very wrong. He was desperate to get me to open the door, and I knew that if he really wanted to, he could break it down. That's when I made the decision that probably saved my life. I couldn't call the police in the middle of nowhere without a clear reason. I had to get out of there. I grabbed a jacket, threw the essentials into a backpack, silently opened the window, and jumped out. Then, I ran through the forest until I couldn't anymore. Luckily, I eventually found a small depression between some rocks, where I spent the rest of the night. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. The sounds of the forest made me paranoid. I didn't know if he had followed me or if something else would come out of nowhere. Thankfully, daylight came, and I kept walking in what I thought was the opposite direction of the cabin. I knew my friends were coming back that day, and that when Leah realized I was missing, she would call the police. I spent 2 days in the Smoky Mountains, terrified and practically without food. But at the end of the second day, I was found by a rescue team. I spent 2 days in the hospital undergoing tests and getting rehydrated. They discovered I had food poisoning, but they never figured out the cause. When the police came to speak with me, I felt my blood run cold. Robert had disappeared. But the worst part was what my friends had found when they returned to the cabin. The living room area, the one with the TV, sofas, and fireplace, was completely covered in plastic. For 22 days, those mountains were searched extensively by the police, but there was never a trace of him again. He probably managed to leave the country. Eventually, I moved to another state and rebuilt my life. Over time, I lost contact with everyone from that group, even Leah. Even though I'm okay, I was never able to camp or hike again, and I'm wary of most people who come into my life. My goal in telling this story is to warn you. Instinct exists for a reason. We often ignore it to avoid upsetting others. But if I learned anything from this experience, it's that it's always better to be safe than sorry. Hey, horror spectator here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you're always in the loop when new videos drop. We post 2 videos every week. If you're really into this content, consider sharing it with your friends. It really helps us grow this community. Now, let's move on to the second story. In 1983, I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, and completely lost. I had my degree, but I had no clue what I wanted to do with my life. I figured a solo backpacking trip through nature might give me some clarity. I was an experienced backpacker, and I mapped out a 43-mile hike along the Appalachian Trail, starting in South Carolina. The plan was to spend 7 days alone and then meet a friend at a designated spot. They would bring resupplies, and we'd finish the hike together. When I told my parents, they weren't worried. I had done trips like this before, and they trusted my skills. So on November 18th, I set off. The first couple of days were incredible. The weather was perfect, the scenery was breathtaking, and I had plenty of time to reflect. But on the third morning, something changed. I woke up in my tent with a deep, unshakable sense of something. It wasn't logical. I had everything I needed, I hadn't forgotten anything, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I think it's important to say that I'm nothing like that guy who always knows how to identify danger and when to act. In fact, even though I grew up in these mountains and have a great sense of direction, I've never been good at recognizing dangerous situations. So having that feeling was completely strange to me. I was still inside the tent when I suddenly remembered what I had dreamed during the night, or at least what I thought had been a dream. I was inside that same tent. It was nighttime, and I had heard some kind of noise, something kind of bizarre. I pushed that feeling aside, got up, and stepped out of the tent. Then I packed up my campsite and got ready to move. As I scanned the tree line, just casually, not expecting to see anything, I thought I saw a man standing behind a tree about 50 or 60 feet away. I did a double take, but when I looked again, he was gone. I stood there, staring at the spot where I had seen him, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me. If someone had been there, why wouldn't they show themselves again? Out here, hikers usually greeted each other, especially in such a remote area. A growing unease settled over me. I wasn't ready to call out. It felt too strange. Instead, I hurriedly packed up my gear and started down the trail, putting as much distance as I could between me and that spot. As I walked, the eerie sensation of being watched wouldn't go away. Every few minutes, I turned around, convinced someone was behind me, but I never saw anyone. Still, the feeling lingered. It got so intense that I started walking faster. Then I was jogging. Then I was running. I knew I was deep in the wilderness, miles from civilization. I had two choices: keep following the trail for hours, possibly into the night, or take a shortcut. I was pretty sure a road ran parallel to the trail, further down the mountain. It would mean cutting through the dense forest. But if I was right, I could get out of there faster. My gut told me I had to leave the trail. So I veered off the trail and started running down the mountainside. It wasn't long before I heard it. Footsteps. Distant, but deliberate. I stopped, listening hard. And there it was again. A crunch of leaves. A snapped twig. Every time I turned, nothing was there. I'm not the smallest guy in my family or friend group. Actually, I've got the kind of build that would make someone think twice before messing with me. But honestly, it's all just for show. I've never had to fight for my life. And the one time I got into a fight in school, I got my ass kicked. I'm just not the kind of guy who feels comfortable getting into a fight, even in a situation like that. And then came the noises. Low, guttural sounds, almost like grunts or murmurs, but not quite words. It was a deep voice, but unnatural. My heart was pounding, my body on high alert. I pushed forward as fast as I could, convinced that whatever was following me was getting closer. As night fell, I still hadn't reached the road. I had no choice but to set up camp in the middle of nowhere. I was terrified. I crawled into my tent, zipped it up tight, and prayed that nothing would come near me. But the moment I lay down, I heard it again. Heavy footsteps circling my campsite. Slow, deliberate, I held my breath, barely moving. Whoever, or whatever, it was never came right up to my tent, but it stayed close. I barely slept. At first light, I packed up and ran, but the feeling of being watched never left. The footsteps, the noises, the lurking presence. It was always just beyond my line of sight. I told myself I had to keep moving, but by the second night, I was still lost. I hadn't found the road. I couldn't backtrack, and I knew I was in serious danger. That night, the sounds returned. The heavy footsteps, the deep, unintelligible voice. I gripped my knife, knowing it wouldn't do much against whatever was out there. By the third day, I was exhausted and out of options. So I made a desperate decision. I ditched my backpack, my tent, sleeping bag, food, and water. Everything I needed to survive. It was dead weight, and I needed to be able to run faster. I ran until my body gave out. I realized that people might find this decision strange, but the truth is, at the time, I was completely desperate, being stalked, and I was absolutely sure that sooner or later, I would find the road. The backpack I was carrying was slowing me down and draining my last bit of energy. I don't know if it was the best decision or not, but it was the only one I could make at that moment. I was found 3 days after ditching my backpack, 6 days after it all began. I barely remember anything, and most of it is a complete blur. The one thing I do remember is leaving my backpack behind and taking off running. But the farther I ran, the more everything faded, like I was slipping in and out of reality. A hunter discovered me slumped against a tree, delirious, dehydrated, and barely clinging to consciousness. At first, I thought he was my stalker, and I panicked. But when I realized he was there to help, I broke down. When I was finally safe in a hospital, I told the authorities everything I could. Some thought I had suffered a mental breakdown, that my fear had made me imagine the whole thing. But others, including local park rangers, believed me. There are other reports, some from park rangers themselves, claiming they were stalked in the same area. To this day, I don't know what was out there with me. No one ever found any evidence of who or what had been following me. All I know is that I wasn't alone in those woods. My cousin and I moved to Oregon a few years ago. We've always been fascinated by nature and the mountains, and even though we couldn't afford an isolated house in the middle of nowhere, we found the perfect place on the outskirts of a small town, just a few miles from one of the entrances to the Pacific Crest Trail. It was everything we wanted: peace, proximity to nature, and the freedom to explore trails whenever we wanted. We grew up together, practically like brothers, spending our childhood hiking mountain trails. As we and our parents got busier over the years, we lost that habit, but our love for nature never faded. That year, we decided to go on a 3-day hike along a less traveled section of the Pacific Crest Trail. We wanted to escape the crowds, camp far away from anyone else, and truly experience the vastness of the wilderness. We packed our backpacks with enough supplies, including a gun that my cousin always carried for emergencies. We had no intention of using it, but knowing we were armed gave us some extra security, especially considering that 3 years prior, there had been some brutal murders in the area. Only one of the perpetrators had been caught. The first day on the trail was peaceful. We hiked for hours, passing through dense forests and open stretches with breathtaking views of the mountains in the distance. As the sun started to set, we found a small plateau that seemed like the perfect campsite. We set up our tents, lit a small fire, and sat down to eat. The sky was clear, and the stars began to appear one by one. It was a perfect night, or at least it seemed that way. It was past 10 o'clock when we heard footsteps on the trail. We weren't expecting to run into anyone, especially at that hour. The sound grew closer, slow and deliberate, as if the person was in no hurry at all. We stayed quiet, watching the shadows beyond the fire's glow. My heart started to race. Then, he appeared. He was a tall man, dressed in dark clothing, holding a camera already pointed at us. He was smiling in a way that made my stomach turn. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was something else. Forced. Like he was either trying to hide an ulterior motive, or genuinely pleased to see the panic on our faces. He greeted us without hesitation and said he was a YouTuber, making a documentary about the murders that had happened in the area. Something was deeply wrong with him. The way he introduced himself, his casual tone while discussing murders, the fact that he was out there alone, in the dark, pointing a camera at us without even asking for permission. It all felt off. My cousin and I exchanged a quick glance. We didn't need to say anything to know that this wasn't normal. We had barely spoken or given any sign of consent. We were still too stunned, trying to process what was happening. As the man talked, describing morbid details of the crimes that had supposedly taken place there, my cousin subtly turned toward the forest behind me. His eyes narrowed, and his expression changed instantly. I knew him well enough to understand. He had seen something. Or someone. A chill ran down my spine. Before I could react, he leaned toward me and whispered, barely moving his lips, "There's a man hiding in the trees." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just some eccentric YouTuber stumbling upon us by chance. This wasn't just a bizarre coincidence. We were about to become part of this man's documentary. The silence grew heavy. My cousin, with a quick and precise movement, opened his backpack and pulled out the gun. He pointed it straight at the man and told him, in a firm, low voice, that he needed to leave immediately. No exaggerated threats, no hesitation. Just a direct warning. But the man didn't react the way we expected. He didn't back away. He didn't try to justify himself. He just smiled, a wide, unsettling smile. And in that instant, my cousin pulled the trigger. The shot missed the man's head by inches. It wasn't meant to hit. If my cousin had wanted to, he would have. That shot was a warning. That's when, from the trees, at least 3 other men suddenly bolted, running in different directions into the forest. Men who had been there the whole time, watching us, waiting. My heart pounded. If my cousin hadn't noticed that hidden figure, how many more minutes would we have had before they did whatever they had planned? The man with the camera was still standing there, staring at us. I expected him to run, to react somehow, but he did nothing. He just tilted his head slightly, as if assessing the situation. Then, without saying a word, he turned off the camera and slowly walked away, disappearing into the darkness, as if he had never been there. We didn't wait to see if they would come back. We packed up everything as fast as we could, shoving what we could into our backpacks, and took off, hiking through the night, guided only by fear and adrenaline. Every sound in the forest felt like someone following us. Every shadow looked like a threat. We walked non-stop until, at dawn, we reached the car. We drove straight to town and went to the police. We reported everything. The encounter, the hidden men, the gunshot, the strange behavior of the so-called YouTuber. They listened, took notes. But it wasn't until they showed us a photograph of the man that we realized just how bad things could have been. His name was Jamie Costwood, and he was wanted in Canada for at least 9 crimes, including brutal murders. Multiple teams were sent into the forest to track down those men, now that they had an exact location. The police said we might be called back to testify, but so far, we haven't heard anything. Hey, horror spectator here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications so you're always in the loop when new videos drop. We post 2 videos every week. If you're really into this content, consider sharing it with your friends. It really helps us grow this community. Now, let's move on to the second story. I was always a shy kid. The kind who spent most days holed up inside, playing video games or reading. I had few friends and had never been on a real hike, let alone an extended one. When I started college, I met some classmates who were into hiking and occasionally invited me along. I got hooked. But after college, as friendships faded with time, I found myself without anyone to hike or camp with again. I never seriously considered doing it alone, not just because I lacked the experience, but because there were too many horror stories of people disappearing, even seasoned hikers. But one day, while researching the Pacific Crest Trail, I stumbled upon a Facebook group called Western Trekkers. It was dedicated to organizing long-distance hikes. They offered everything from short, one-day hikes to extended, full-on wilderness expeditions where you'd carry your tent and supplies on your back for days. The idea was simple. A group of strangers, all sharing a passion for the outdoors, embarking on a unique adventure together. It seemed safe enough. There were plenty of positive reviews, real people with real profiles, comments about previous trips, and an experienced organizer. But now, after what happened, I know that none of that truly guarantees safety. There were 7 of us when we set out. Each of us carried a heavy backpack, filled with freeze-dried food, water, lightweight tents, and a few personal comforts. 2 jeeps dropped us off at a remote point on the trail, far from any town, far from civilization. The plan was simple: a week of hiking, camping at pre-designated sites until we reached the next exit point, where the jeeps would be waiting to take us back. The expedition leader, a man named Mark, assured us that everything was under control. He had done this trail countless times, knew where to find water, where to set up camp, where to avoid hazards. I trusted him. We all did. The first night felt normal. The sky was clear, moonless, a vast blanket of stars stretching above us. We sat around a small fire, sharing stories about past hikes. Some seemed more experienced than others. There was a couple, Daniel and Emily, who clearly knew their way around the outdoors. A woman named Sarah, quiet but friendly. A man named Ethan, who spoke little and always seemed to be observing the rest of us with an unreadable expression. And then there was Hannah, the youngest of the group, full of energy and enthusiasm. I felt good about the group, like this could be a great way to make some friends. I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's trek, but at some point, I woke up. I remember seeing the shadow of someone moving past my tent. The fire was still smoldering faintly, which meant I hadn't been asleep for long. I figured it was just someone getting up to use the bathroom. Morning came, bringing the rustling sounds of people emerging from their tents. We gathered near the food stash to fix a quick breakfast. That was when we realized Mark was missing. At first, we weren't too concerned. Someone suggested he had gone for a morning walk and would be back soon. But as the minutes stretched into hours, unease settled over us. Something was wrong. That's when I mentioned seeing a figure pass my tent in the night. I hadn't seen who it was, but judging by the shape, it could have been a man. We checked Mark's tent for clues. That's when the weirdness started. His tent was empty, his sleeping bag untouched, as if he had never gone to bed. His boots were inside, near the entrance. That was strange. Did he have another pair? Or had he left barefoot? No one goes hiking without boots. We searched for footprints, but the ground was too dry, too hard. His backpack was still there, and when we looked inside, we found his GPS. That made no sense. He was experienced. He wouldn't have gone anywhere without it. The only thing out of place was his canteen, knocked over next to the backpack. As if he had stepped out of the tent and simply vanished. We split into two groups to search for him, but as night fell, there was no sign of Mark. We told ourselves not to panic. People get lost, right? Maybe he had wandered off to relieve himself and lost his bearings, but something felt off. None of us wanted to admit the obvious. We were in the middle of nowhere, and none of us were skilled navigators. Ethan was the first to suggest we stay put, in case Mark found his way back. In the morning, some of us could hike to a higher elevation to get a signal and call for help. Ethan volunteered to go, and Emily offered to go with him. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the day's events, analyzing how everyone had reacted, what everyone had said. I had no concrete reason to suspect anything, but something about Ethan unsettled me. The way he watched people, the way his expression never changed. I told myself I was being paranoid. We needed to trust each other if we wanted to get out of this. At dawn, Ethan and Emily set off. 3 hours later, they returned, defeated. No signal, no way to contact the authorities. But something about Emily was different. She looked shaken, kept glancing at Ethan like she was afraid of him. I asked if she was okay. She just said yeah, and left it at that. We debated whether to pack up and keep moving. If we followed the trail long enough, we'd find service. But it was already late afternoon, and we had no idea how far we'd have to go. We decided to stay one more night and head out early in the morning. Nothing could have prepared us for what happened next. At around 5 a.m., Ethan woke us, claiming he had been attacked while going to the bathroom. He didn't know by what, only that something had grabbed at him. His shirt was torn, but he had no visible wounds. It felt theatrical, exaggerated. But the others were panicked, believing every word. Then we realized Emily was gone. That was the moment I knew. Ethan was lying. His story, his behavior, the way Emily had looked at him before. Something was very, very wrong. I decided to play along. If he was involved, I couldn't let him know I suspected him. I needed to act like I believed him. I told the group we had to move. We'd camp wherever we needed to, but we had to find a signal. Ethan hesitated. If he insisted on staying, it would look suspicious, so he agreed. 45 minutes into our hike, we found service. Instantly. How had Ethan and Emily not found it before? Within an hour, search and rescue arrived. They combed the mountains for days. I told the police everything I knew, everything I suspected. But even now, 3 years later, there's been no sign of Mark. No sign of Emily. They vanished without a trace. I've often questioned myself since then. Was I wrong about Ethan? If he was involved, how had he done it without leaving a single clue? They brought search dogs. They searched every possible route. Nothing. I never heard from Ethan again, or from the others. None of us ever spoke after that trip. But something happened in those mountains. Something I still don't understand. I've lived my whole life on the outskirts of Packwood, in a secluded house right on the edge where the forest meets the Pacific Crest Trail. I was always surrounded by nature, by trails stretching through dense vegetation, by paths disappearing into the dark depths of the forest. Because of that, I learned early on how to navigate them, developing a kind of instinct to find my way through that vast, green, shadowy expanse. The story I'm about to tell happened in 2001. When my best friend, Jacob, and I, along with a group of school friends, took on a challenge that changed our life forever. We were only 12 years old, and like any group of kids our age growing up near the woods, we had a natural fascination with the unknown, with exploring abandoned places, with the stories the older folks told that, even when we tried to brush them off, always sent a shiver down our spines. Near where we lived, There was a small village that had been nearly abandoned over the years. A few houses were still habitable, but most were nothing more than decaying wooden skeletons with peeling walls. For months, we talked about going there, about exploring those ruins. But despite our curiosity, we never quite built up the courage to go through with it. Then, some older boys heard about our hesitation and dared us to do it. Refusing wasn't an option. We were 12. A challenge was a challenge, and our pride wouldn't let us ignore it. So, we planned everything. And on the night of July 13th, precisely at 10:30 p.m., each of us snuck out of our bedrooms, making sure our parents were asleep. We met at the entrance to the trail leading to the abandoned village. Even though we tried to act tough, the truth was, we were all scared. Part of the fear came from how we kept egging each other on, feeding into our worries, swapping stories that, even though we knew were exaggerated, still made us uneasy. But there was another part, something deeper, that we couldn't ignore. Since we were little, we'd heard our grandparents talk about the forest, about the things that happened there, about why they avoided crossing it after dark. And no matter how much we tried to rationalize those stories as mere superstition, the truth was that, in that moment, swallowed by darkness and surrounded by the sounds of the night, every word of those tales suddenly made perfect sense. We walked for a long time, and it must have been close to midnight when we finally saw the first ruined structure. What I felt in that instant is something I'll never be able to fully describe, but the best way to put it is that everything there felt empty, like we were stepping into a place devoid of life, a spot that, somehow, had been forgotten even by nature itself. The silence was absolute, oppressive, and as cliché as it may sound, that's when we realized that even the usual sounds of the forest had vanished. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. The place didn't just feel like a dead village. It felt like a graveyard. We had been there for a while, exploring the wreckage and trying to keep our cool, when we heard something that froze us to our core. From inside one of the houses, a familiar voice echoed. It was Jacob's mom. She was calling for him in a perfectly normal tone. No urgency, no distress. But it didn't make sense. What was she doing there, in the middle of nowhere, at that hour? How did she know we were there? I immediately looked at Jacob, and his face had gone completely pale, drained of all color. At that moment, he was probably only thinking about the punishment waiting for him when he got home. But to me, it sounded so strange. I knew his mother perfectly well, and yes, it sounded like her, but at the same time, it was an odd sound. For the rest of the group, who didn't know his mom or recognize her voice, what was happening was simply terrifying. Jacob, maybe trying to downplay the situation, told us to hide. If his mom was here, it meant he'd been caught, but there was no reason for all of us to get in trouble. We agreed and backed away behind the trees, watching as he hesitantly walked toward the house's entrance, like he had no other choice. As soon as he stepped inside, the silence swallowed the village again. Time passed. I can't say exactly how long, but it was enough for fear to start overtaking every other emotion. We stood there frozen, waiting for Jacob to come back out, but he never did. I waited and waited until sheer panic began creeping in. Something wasn't right. I had to go get him. The others tried to stop me, but in the end, they agreed to come with me. We circled the house, trying to see if there was another exit, but everything pointed to the front door being the only way in or out. The windows were boarded up with wooden planks and stones that made it impossible to peek inside. We decided to go in. The place was completely empty. No sign of Jacob, no mother, nothing. We searched every corner, every room, climbed up and down the stairs looking for any trace of him. Until suddenly, my blood ran cold. From upstairs, I heard my mom's voice calling my name. I froze. That was impossible. She couldn't be here. And yet, the voice was identical. The tone, the pitch, the way she spoke. The sound echoed down the stairs, reaching the spot where we stood. I didn't need to say anything. We all understood in that same instant that we needed to get out. We bolted through the forest without looking back, lungs burning, panic consuming us, until somehow I made it home. I climbed through my bedroom window, shaking uncontrollably, and spent the rest of the night frozen in place, sitting on my bed, unable to process what had just happened. The next morning, as soon as my mom saw me, she knew something was wrong. I told her everything. Not even 30 minutes later, we were at the police station. Of course, no one believed our story. For weeks, months, we were treated like outcasts, like suspects, like kids who had made up some ridiculous lie to cover up something terrible. They searched for Jacob, combed through the forest, scoured every ruin, but they never found anything. No tracks. No traces. Jacob walked into that house and never came back out. Since that night, I've lived in the shadows of society. I know something lives in that forest, in that village, in that house. And I know it's something that was never meant to be found. Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're exploring two stories of people who ventured into the Appalachian Mountains searching for peace and nature, but instead found something far more sinister. From a group of friends who decided to explore the tunnels hidden beneath the mountains, to a small community living deep in the woods that's slowly being hunted. These stories got under my skin, and I hope they do the same to you. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. This is a story I don't usually tell, and I definitely never told it like this before. I've shared it with a few people, sometimes because I knew they wouldn't believe me, other times because I knew they would. Either way, it's something we never really talk about openly, mostly because every time I think about it, my stomach tightens up and my hands start shaking a little. It's one of those memories that never really fades, even after decades. It happened in the summer of 1983, deep in the Appalachian Mountains of Western Virginia. Back then, I was 19, and my friends and I were always chasing something to do. None of us had money, and most of us still lived at home, so we made our own adventures. It was a time when that part of the country was mostly forgotten, especially the area we were from. Not that things are much different today, but with the internet, it's gotten a little better. I'm not going to say exactly where I'm from, though some people might figure it out. I just don't want this story coming back around dragging my name, or the names of the people who were with me. I mean, I want to tell it because I need to, but I don't want to be associated with it. And I don't want my old friends to be either. They've all left it behind, and I don't have the right to dig it up again, especially without their permission. I tried reaching out to them before sharing this, but they've all left the state, and I lost touch with the rest. I'm the only one still around here. So, all the names, just so it's clear, aren't real. I hope you can understand my side of it. So, there were 5 of us. Me, Michael, Greg, Tommy, and Aaron. We'd grown up together, spent our teenage years messing around in the woods, hiking, camping, fishing, all that. But that summer, I'd gotten obsessed with something else entirely. Caves. I'd found this old geology book at a thrift store that talked about the cave systems beneath the Appalachians. How they stretched for hundreds of miles through limestone and dolomite, twisting and folding with the mountain's age. It said that beneath those ridges ran a hidden world where the water had carved its way for millions of years. Massive chambers connected by narrow tunnels, so old they predated the mountains themselves. The thought of it got under my skin. The idea that there was an entire landscape right below our feet that hardly anyone had seen. I read everything I could find after that. Talked to local rangers, even bought a cheap map that marked known entrances. I was completely hooked. That's what led me to talk the guys into coming along. I told them it'd just be a few days camping near a small town not far from where we lived. A place known for its network of caves that supposedly went on for miles. It was something we'd done countless times before. They were all as thrilled about it as I was, so we packed light, sleeping bags, flashlights, some food, and a few old climbing ropes that belonged to Greg's older brother. None of us really knew what we were doing, but we didn't care. We were young, dumb, and too sure of ourselves to imagine anything could really go wrong. As you can imagine, I carry a huge weight knowing I was the one who suggested it. But I was young. And when you're young, you think bad things only happen to other people. The first 2 caves were pretty standard. Tight spaces, cool, damp air, slippery rock. We laughed most of the way through them, taking turns pretending to be explorers. The routes had been great for building our confidence. They had good light and decent visibility. It wasn't until the 3rd cave that things started to feel wrong. It was late afternoon when we found it, tucked into a slope behind a wall of thick pines. On the maps I'd bought, that route was one of 5 marked with an X, and I wanted to find out why. The entrance was narrow, just a crack between boulders, and the air seeping from it was cold enough to raise goosebumps on my arms. Before we went in, I warned everyone that the cave might be unstable and that we'd need to be careful. I told them it was marked with an X, so there was probably something dangerous about it. But instead of seeing that as a red flag, we were stupid enough to see it as a sign of adventure. We tied a rope at the entrance just in case, and started making our way in. At first, it wasn't that bad. The tunnel opened into a wider passage that ran straight for what felt like 100 feet, before turning sharply left. That's where we saw the first symbols. They were carved into the walls, deep and uneven, as if someone had used a knife or a rock. Circles crossed by jagged lines, triangles filled with scratches, shapes I couldn't make sense of. Nobody said anything, but the mood changed instantly. It was like the air itself had thickened. I could hear everyone's breathing getting heavier, faster, even though no one was moving much. It was a mix of excitement at finding something ancient, but at the same time, the terror of it being something evil. We kept going, mostly because none of us wanted to be the first to say we should turn back. After another stretch, the tunnel widened into a small chamber. The floor was covered in something dark, wet-looking, like mud or rot. It stuck to our boots and gave off a smell that hit so hard it made my eyes water. Greg gagged, turned around, and threw up against the wall. The smell was unlike anything I'd ever known, sweet and rotten at the same time, like decay that had been sitting too long. On the far wall was a wooden cross, about 3 feet tall, nailed into the rock and turned upside down. There was something written on it, but the light from our flashlights was weak and shaky. I stepped closer to read it, but I never got the chance. From the opposite side of the chamber, deep in the shadows, came this sound. Sharp, high, and completely unnatural. Like metal scraping glass, followed by a rush of movement. I can't even describe the noise properly because we all heard something different. The only thing we agreed on was that it wasn't made by people or animals. Then, something lunged at Greg before any of us could react. He screamed, and all our lights swung toward the sound, catching a flash of something pale and hunched. Instinct took over. I grabbed the cross off the wall. It came loose with a crack, and swung it as hard as I could toward the shape that was dragging Greg down. It wasn't something I did consciously. It was pure instinct to grab that cross and use it as a weapon. The sound it made when I hit it was awful, like striking wet meat. Greg slipped free and scrambled backward, but before I could pull him up, more of those things came crawling out from the dark edges of the chamber. Dozens, maybe more. I don't even know. By that point, my vision was blurred from panic. I honestly felt like if I'd stayed there another second, I could have died from a heart attack. We ran in pure panic. The rope we'd tied earlier was the only reason we made it out at all. I followed that line like my life depended on it, because it did. My throat burned from screaming and breathing in that foul air, and I could barely hear anything over the pounding in my chest. I didn't know if the sounds behind me were my friends or those things chasing us. Finally, a faint light appeared ahead, a thin beam that cut through the darkness like a promise. I ran toward it, tripping over the uneven rock until the tunnel spat me out into the open. I fell hard onto the dirt, gasping, lungs burning like I'd swallowed fire. Michael was already outside, crouched by a tree, pale as a ghost and shaking so badly he couldn't even hold his flashlight steady. A few seconds later, Aaron stumbled out behind me, eyes wide and glassy, and Greg collapsed right after, clutching his side, sobbing without sound. None of us spoke. We didn't need to. We just bolted into the tree line, hiding behind the nearest pines as if the shadows could protect us. From there, we could still see the dark slit in the rock where we'd come from. It felt alive, like it was breathing. We heard faint noises echoing out from inside, scratching, a muffled shuffle, something wet dragging across stone. None of it sounded human. It took us a moment to realize Tommy hadn't come out. I remember the exact second it hit me. Michael looked around, counted us, and his face just dropped. We started yelling his name, first in confusion, then in panic. Each time our voices bounced back off the mountain, thinner and more desperate than before. We waited, God knows how long, calling again and again, hoping to hear his voice answer from inside. Nothing. The entrance stayed black. Nothing moved. Whatever those things were, they hadn't crossed the threshold. I think the light stopped them, the way they'd flinched from our lanterns inside. Maybe the sun was worse for them. That thought should have comforted me, but it didn't. It only made me think about Tommy, still somewhere in that darkness, maybe surrounded by them. We got closer, just a few steps from the mouth of the cave, our hearts pounding so loud it drowned everything else. Michael, shaking, grabbed the rope we'd left tied at the entrance and started pulling it toward him. At first, it gave a little resistance, as if caught on something deep inside. Then it came loose all at once. When he lifted the end into the light, we saw it, frayed and uneven, like it had been sliced clean through. No one said a word after that. We just stood there, staring at that black opening, unable to move, unable to breathe. I think that was the moment we all buried him, right there in front of that cave. We didn't have a coffin or a grave, but in our heads, it was over. Tommy wasn't just a friend, he was family. We'd grown up together, spent every summer side by side, and now he was gone. And there was nothing any of us could do about it. The grief hit me so hard I couldn't even cry. My chest felt hollow, like something had been carved out of me. For a long time, none of us said anything. We just stayed there, half hidden behind those trees, waiting for the sun to go down, terrified that if we turned our backs, something from that cave might follow. But Michael was the first to pull himself together. He said we had to leave while there was still daylight, that we had to go get help for Tommy. I think it was that sliver of hope that got us moving again, heading down the mountain as fast as we could. By the time we reached the ranger station, we looked half dead, covered in blood, mud, and scratches. They called for help, but no one believed what we said. The official story was that a bear attacked us inside the cave and we panicked, that Tommy got lost or trapped. The animal attack specialist looked at us like we were lab rats. I think both he and we knew damn well it hadn't been a bear or any other kind of animal. But he kept quiet. A rescue team went in as soon as the first light of dawn hit, and they found nothing but empty tunnels. And that's when the most inexplicable thing of all happened. They found Tommy, alive and without a single scratch, but in complete shock. They said he'd been found inside a crack in the ground, barely able to move. When we saw him, our relief was immense, but at the same time, there was this huge weight in our chests. It was like we'd all gone through something so traumatic there was no way to ever truly get over it. And back then, there weren't the kinds of support resources that exist today. Greg never spoke about it again. Michael moved away a few years later and stopped talking to us. Aaron joined the Navy, and I haven't heard from him since. I stayed in the area, though I've never gone near those mountains again. Tommy's parents got him help in Pennsylvania, and although I heard about him a couple years ago, I haven't heard anything since. I'm still the guy who survived a bear attack, but I know that thing wasn't a bear, or any other animal. I never again felt the urge to explore the mountains, and I just hope no one ever has to go through what we went through. I've always loved the forest. I grew up with my grandmother in West Virginia. She was a woman many called a witch, but that was just jealousy talking. My grandmother always preferred the company of trees over people, and from a young age, she learned to identify every plant and its properties. I barely ever got sick, and I remember there was always some kind of remedy, some cure that made life feel different, more meaningful. Like we were part of nature itself, more than other people were. I'm telling you this, so you understand that the forests and the mountains were always my grandmother's home, and eventually, they became mine too. I never feared them, but I always respected them, knowing they were part of an ecosystem I couldn't survive without. When she died, and I lost the only family I had left, I started spending more and more time in the woods. I eventually bought a cabin literally in the middle of nowhere. After just a few years living there in isolation, I knew every inch of the land around my home like the back of my hand. The rivers, the caves, the ancient twisted trees. As the years went by, I learned to recognize the forest through all 4 seasons, each with its own beauty and its own challenges. I also learned how to survive whatever came my way. Over time, I met people who, like me, sought refuge in the solitude of the forest. Good people, tired of the noise and lies of the cities, who just wanted a quiet life, far from government control, far from others. Some folks called them feral people, savages, drifters, feared by most. But that's not how I saw them. I saw in them a deep desire to live in peace, to exist in harmony with the rhythm of the earth. I got to know them slowly, one face at a time, one story by every campfire in the clearings. Sometimes they'd come to my cabin during storms, asking for shelter. Other times we'd cross paths on the trails, exchanging supplies, plants, a few words. Over time, they accepted me as one of their own, even if I didn't live within their communities. But about 4 years ago, something started to change in the forest. At first, it was small things, barely noticeable signs that only someone who'd lived there for years would catch. Human footprints where no one should have been. Hardly anyone hiked in that area. It was too rough, too far from the popular trails. Burned out campfires full of trash, clearly made by people who didn't respect the woods. One night, around 11 p.m., I was reheating some leftovers when I heard a gunshot. It shook me to my core. After years of peace, I wasn't used to the violent crack of a firearm anymore. I swear, even the forest felt it. The air itself changed. It was like something profane had just happened. And I'm not just saying that out of instinct. The evidence was there too. The usual forest sounds stopped, replaced by something darker, something off. I stepped out onto the porch, trying to see if I could spot anything, but there was nothing to see. Just that heavy feeling that something had shifted. That shot felt like an omen, one we'd all quietly sensed coming. Something was on its way. I just didn't realize how bad it was. A few days later, I came across one of the communities I told you about, and that's when I heard about the disappearances. First, it was an old man who'd lived alone for years in a tent near the river. He used to join the others for meals, even though he stayed mostly on his own. When he hadn't shown up for 2 days, they went to check on him. But the tent was empty, and there was no sign of him. They thought maybe he'd died somewhere nearby and his body got lost in the thick vegetation. Maybe he'd gotten sick and wandered off. Maybe animals had gotten to him. But if it had been animals, there would have been traces. Then it was Silvana. She was one of the first people I'd met out there. She loved animals, could read their tracks like a language. She'd even once helped a lost bear cub reunite with its mother. When I heard she'd gone missing, it felt like something inside me fell into place in the worst possible way. We searched for her in silence, with the desperation of people looking for a family member. But we never found a thing. Some suggested maybe it had been animals, since she spent so much time around them. But none of us really believed that. The animals loved her gentleness, and if something had happened, there would have been evidence. Fear started to seep through the forest like fog on a winter morning. People stopped wandering far from their camps. Fires were kept smaller, so as not to draw unwanted attention. Then came 3 more disappearances. 2 men and a woman. I knew all of them. For weeks, the remaining members of the communities tried convincing themselves it was all just accidents. It was winter, after all. Survival was tougher that time of year. It was possible, sure. We all loved the forest, but we also knew how treacherous it could be. One wrong step, and you could vanish forever. But something in my gut told me there was more to it. I could see the same thought reflected in their eyes. Even the forest itself seemed to mourn those people. It's hard to explain, but we could feel its grief. Then, one cold day, late November, I found out the truth. I'd gone out early, with the mist still covering the valleys, searching for a rare herb that only grew in the wettest parts of the woods, along an old hunting trail I barely ever visited. In all the years I'd lived there, I'd only been in that area twice before. Both times looking for that same plant. It was a long walk from my cabin, so I tried to move fast to make it back before dark. I hadn't been there more than 30 minutes when I heard voices in the distance. At first, they were just muffled sounds, men's voices, coming from a clearing below where I stood. I crept closer, not sure why I was so scared, but instinct told me I was about to see something terrible. I wasn't wrong. Through the thick brush, I saw them. 4 men, hooded, dressed in dark clothes, shotguns slung over their shoulders. They moved with a cold precision, like they'd done this before. 2 of them had their backs to me, 2 were facing my direction, but I was hidden and far enough away to stay unseen. They were holding something, but I couldn't tell what it was until they tossed it into a pit in the ground. That's when I realized it was a body. For a moment, time froze. Then I heard one of them crack a joke, making the others laugh. They were enjoying it. I felt sick. My legs moved on their own, backing away slowly, until I saw him. There was a 5th man, standing off in the distance, between the trees. He wasn't wearing a hood. I could see his face clearly, and he could see mine. He didn't move, just stared at me, with this faint smile. Not surprised, but entertained. And he was amused by my fear. Everything happened fast. I stumbled backward, hitting the ground hard, making enough noise to draw the others' attention. They turned toward me immediately, their posture changing. They were ready to hunt. But the man without the hood raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He said something I couldn't make out completely, but I caught one sentence, that I wasn't one of the drifters. I didn't wait around to hear more. I ran for my life. I ran until my chest burned and my throat felt like it was being cut open by the cold air. The winter terrain was brutal, and I had to stop several times to catch my breath. I didn't know if they were following me, but I knew they'd seen me, and that meant I had to act fast. When I finally reached the part of the forest I knew well, I hid inside a cave and called the authorities using my satellite phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number. I told them everything, from the exact location to what I'd witnessed. They said they'd send a patrol. Hours later, I got a call back saying they'd found nothing, except that the ground had been freshly dug up. I asked if they were bringing in dogs to search for bodies, but I never got an answer. They just said the investigation would continue, but I already knew better. No one cares about the people who live off the grid. Not long ago, I found out the case had been closed. No arrests, no suspects questioned. They just told me we were safe now, because the men had left the area. And it's true that no one else has disappeared since then. But the silence they left behind is worse than fear itself. The forests of this country are full of people like them. They didn't stop. They just moved on, free to do it all over again somewhere else without ever facing a single consequence.